then Mr. Neil Butcher is our lead, so he's going to then take us through the rest of the day and the activities and the presentations. So we're going to ask Mrs. Paige Wilmot from JTC to bless us at this time.
Thank you, Ms. Robinson. Let us pray. Father, you are so good, and we pause to tell you thanks. Thanks for this beautiful day you have made, and we are so grateful for the opportunity to serve at this time. We understand, Lord, the power of legacy and that which we're doing and what we want to leave behind for the generations to come. We ask for wisdom as we go through today. We ask, Lord, that this be a very productive day and that all that we do, Lord, will leave a lasting impact on the education system in Jamaica and across the world. Be with us now, as always, and continue to be a good God and a good guide to us. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Right. Good morning, everybody. As you've heard, my name is Neil Butcher. For those of you who haven't had the misfortune of meeting me already, I am a consultant to the Ministry of Education, supporting the rollout and implementation of the Education Management Information System over the next 3 years or so. For those of you familiar with accents, you'll have picked up that I am from South Africa. And for those of you who've had the opportunity to see South African cricket players on the field, you'll know, unfortunately, that we're not endowed with subtlety, tact, or good manners as part of our general makeup. So I'll issue one apology now for being myself as a South African. But I'm very excited about this upcoming workshop. I've had the opportunity to be engaging with many colleagues here since I started work in about September last year. And I really do feel like this is a momentous occasion from the perspective of our project, because this is going to be the first opportunity that we're going to have had in Jamaica to really have a holistic picture of an education management information system for the country. I'm just going to make one quick observation about that, and that is to make clear that an education management information system is not one single platform or application. We're actually talking about a whole ecosystem of different data systems that exist within the education system, and those different systems together will make up the whole EMIS. So please be clear that when I'm talking about an EMIS, I'm not talking about one computer application. I'm talking about all the various systems that exist within the Ministry of Education. I'm saying that as a very important point up front because I think too often people get fixated on the idea that what we're doing is creating a one-size-fits-all solution that we're implementing to meet all the different needs of the country, and that then precludes the use of other systems. So especially for those of you who are system owners of existing applications in the ministry, please don't be worried about that. The purpose of the next 3 days is actually very much a working session to sort through and understand exactly how we want those different systems to integrate. So that all said, I'd like to move formally onto the proceedings, greeting our honorable guests here, all of you as well, and we're looking forward to more people coming in and out over the course of the next 3 days as we work through exactly what we want the EMIS to deliver for education in Jamaica. And I will talk more about that later. We're very honored to have Dr. Cassandre Troop, the Permanent Secretary of the Ministry of Education, with us today. She's managed to get here pretty much on time, despite having been summoned to Parliament this morning. So that's Cabinet, sorry. So that's quite an achievement, and we're very grateful for your presence here in launching this activity, and also for your custodianship of the rollout and implementation of the EMIS as a whole. So we have a few different introductions, but I'm going to start by hand over to you, Dr. Troop, to launch the workshop, if you don't mind. Thank you so much.
Good morning, everyone. Let me greet our moderator, Neil Butcher. Thank you so much for accepting the invitation to work with us. You can't imagine how grateful I am to have you on board and for the progress that we have made since. Thank you so much for all that you do. Let me greet our Dennis Zula, our resident coordinator from the United Nations resident coordinator. Good morning, sir. Pleased to meet you again. And our very own, Olga, you are always with us from UNICEF. We are really grateful for UNICEF. And I can declare it right here, for every step of the way, UNICEF has been with us. Be it literacy, be it behavior change, be it finding students who we can't locate for any reason in the COVID. For every difficult moment that I have had in education, we can rely and depend on UNICEF. Thank you, Olga, for being at the table always. When we were looking at the National Plan of Action for Children, you were there and you helped to champion. When we went overseas to look at education transformation, you were there. And when we were struggling to get our briefs together, Olga said, we can get a consultant for that. And we'll prepare that for you and prepare our minister. My God, this is the kind of wind beneath our wings that we have. Let's just hear it for UNICEF, please. So today is a big day for me. I am extremely proud of this moment, Neil, that we have finally got together to pull all the stakeholders on board. Transformation is happening in the Ministry of Education, Skills, Youth, and Information. And that is happening because we believe that we have a brighter future to guarantee for our learners. And this is what it is. I want to always make the connection. Everything that we do in education is about the learner. If you are moving a piece of paper, if you are paying somebody, if you are consulting, if you are, it's about that little child in Prickly Pold, in Moko, anywhere you want to name. It's really about the life of that child. How do we get our steps together to make sure that that child is guaranteed a bright future? That's the job. And so today, we are pulling together all our key stakeholders. So I have my JTC, Dr. Gordon, good to see you. Right? I have my head of corporate service, Diane Campbell, all the pieces. I have my head of educational planning right here. I have TVET right here. I have my PFO right here. I have people from JEP. I have the tertiary unit. I have the e-learning, who is always there for me. You notice how loud I said that? Yes, because we rely on them for the technological support in our schools. All the key people, NCEL is there, JTech is there, the special education unit is there. Every piece of the ministry that uses data, we had to pull them together because we have been doing this independently for far too long. We have been reacting. For every time there's a need, we set up a team and we get the people to come and we get something going and we start to respond. But we are finally at a stage where we said to ourselves, this cannot continue. We are all over the place and we have been dubbed we are defined as incipient. We need to get it together. And so today is about that. How do we get all the pieces in one room so we can communicate, so we can decide who does what, where do we start, who is the process owner, how do we support each other. So that's what the EMIS is about. It's not just an application that collects and integrates and processes and disseminates. It's really about how do we do it together because our students deserve that. So we have data for teachers. Right now, with the MyHR Plus, we are paying over 17,000 teachers in an integrated solution. We have data as it relates to our exams, our students who are assessed from age 4. Where do we go with that? How does it connect with the students in grade 1, grade 2, grade 3? For time to time, we have to report into the international space as to how our students are doing, how are they progressing. We have to be hurrying to call schools to tell us, let me see your internal assessment results. And it's very difficult to pull that across the sector because everybody does it differently. Now the EMIS will eliminate that challenge. We will have a standard of data as it relates to assessment in our schools, and we can pull that at the click of a button. Far too long we have been called to give an update on attendance. What's the attendance rate for today, Neil? And we are unable to report that. With the EMIS, we can go at a click of a button and we can see what is happening in all schools in Jamaica at 10 o'clock. Who is in school and who is not in school. And we have a responsibility to be agile and responsive. We need to know that 5%, 10% of a school is absent, and we need to zero in on that school immediately to find out what is happening with those boys and what is happening with those girls. That is a responsibility that we have. Now we are not able to move quickly because it takes time to get that data. That's what the EMIS will do. We are going to be able to track our learners from very early, from as early as age 4, so we can pick up, are there any delays, and what do we do in terms of a customized response. We're going to pick up our teacher data. JTC has over 15,000, I think, when I last interacted, teachers registered on the system. We have to get our teachers registered. We are moving into licensure. We have to have that data in one place at the click of a button. We need to know who are the teachers who are upgrading themselves, who are benefiting from professional development. We do not know that instantly. So I'm just laying it on your heart for you to understand the importance. PIOJ, when you want data about performance and the human capital, we have to be scurrying all over the place to put it together in your format, right? We're going to fix that. So colleagues, this is what this conversation this morning is about. How do we put the data infrastructure in place, the architecture that will tell us what is the process from here to there? Who will start? Who will continue? Who monitors? Who is responsible? We will have in our ministry a data center in the Planning and Development Division, Education Planning and Development Division. All of this will be there. So though we have different persons, project lead and so, it will be resident in one place. So when we say, Vivian, we need to paint our schools, pull the list from the data. Which are the schools that are eligible for painting? Which are the schools that are eligible for furniture? Everything should be there. Which are the schools that are underperforming and need some national focus? Which are the schools that the labs need to be upgraded? This is really what it is about. How do we connect all the pieces so we can serve the system in a responsive way? So I'm a very, very excited permanent secretary today because we are now on the right trajectory. We are here finally, Vivian. It has taken a long time for us to get here. And I want to especially welcome and acknowledge UNESCO, because the application that we are using was provided by UNESCO. And I remember when this came on board, in the COVID, we were trying to find a way to have learning in the remote space. And we were actually writing a program and consulting with persons to develop a learning management system. And we suddenly found Open EMIS. I don't even remember if it's UNESCO who brought it to the table. But we found it, or it is UNICEF. But one of our partners said to us, this is an application out there being used by other countries, and it is open to Jamaica. We can adopt it. And then we deviated. We wanted to learn more about this, and we got onto it. And we got consultants. We sent persons for training, and today we have adopted it to the Jamaican context. And the beauty about Open EMIS, provided by UNESCO, is that members in the Caribbean, they use it, and whatever they do to improve it, we have access to that. So we do not have to reinvent the wheel. And whatever we do and they use it, they also have access to that. So the special education features, that's something that we will be adopting that other countries have gone ahead and developed. How do we track nutrition? Other countries have already gone ahead and used that feature to demonstrate how persons are accessing nutritional support daily and how it is benefiting those students. So we know in some countries, if you benefit from nutritional support, how are you progressing academically? So we can share definitively that breakfast helps with cognitive development and school improvement. We say that now in Jamaica, but we do not have the definitive data. That is what Open EMIS has promised for us. So UNESCO, I left you for last because I wanted to contextualize what you have brought to the table. Thank you to my international development partners. You're always responding to our support. You're always responding to our needs. You're always there. And Dana, you are here, World Food, you will be logging on to the EMIS because we are going to be connecting our nutritional support framework into that platform. So I'm saying this because I want everybody to understand, if you are doing something independently of this process and you are called into it, please do not resist. We have to integrate all our systems into one application, and we have to have a common understanding in this place today. Today is the first of a series. We will come back. Once we put that framework together, we are coming back to talk with you again to determine if this is it. Because we want a common understanding. Who is responsible for what? Where will we start? Where will we monitor? Who will pull? Who will report? This is transformation in education. We have a responsibility, colleagues, to give our students the best. We are not pleased at this time with how our system is performing. Our students are not maximizing. We are not getting the returns on investment. And today is another step in that direction. Let me thank Charlene and the team, our project lead. Let me thank all my support officers in the field for making today possible. I'm looking forward to the outcome. May God continue to bless you as we champion the cause of every single Jamaican child. Somebody who had an experience or who is having an experience like you and I, and we want them in the future at a table like this, advancing the cause of education. God bless you.
Thank you so much for those inspirational words, but also for the exceptional clarity. I feel like I've already made myself redundant, which is the goal of any good consultant. But I think that the marching orders we've been given by the Permanent Secretary are exactly why we're here today. And I'll just sort of reinforce one of the things she said, that this is the opportunity that people will get for consultation and for making sure that your needs are taken account of. So it really is an important process. It will extend beyond the workshop, but today represents the beginning of that exercise. So with that said, I now hand over to our colleague Dennis Zulu from the United Nations Resident Coordinator Office, who's also going to offer a few introductory remarks. Over to you, Dennis.
Good morning. Dr. Casson Troop, Permanent Secretary, Minister of Education, Skills, Youth and Information. From your speech, I heard that there's quite a lot of Ministry of Education staff present here today. Totally delighted to have you here. My colleagues from United Nations, Olga, Dana, and the rest are also in this room. Teachers, ladies and gentlemen, good morning to you all. It's always a pleasure to come to these events. Then I meet all the important people in this country. And I think this one is particularly important because if you're not doing what you're doing in education, we wouldn't be here talking and discussing these issues, because education, as you know, is critical for national development. It's therefore a privilege to join you this morning at this pivotal EMIS stakeholder consultation, where we collectively take a bold step forward, I must say, to strengthen Jamaica's education data system. This workshop is not just a technical exercise, it's also a crucial investment in the future of education, ensuring that data-driven decision-making leads to more equitable, inclusive, and quality learning outcomes for Jamaican children. And for those of us working in the United Nations, data is extremely, extremely, extremely important, because it's not just about knowing where you're going, but also knowing whether you're actually making a difference in what you're doing in country. And as we all know, education remains the foundation for national development. In this increasing digital world, robust data management is essential to shaping policies, optimizing resources, and delivering better learning experiences. The government of Jamaica, through the Ministry of Education, Skills, Youth and Information, has demonstrated, and you could see that from the PS's passion, that strong leadership in advancing the digital transformation of the education system is critical. The integration of the Open EMIS within a broader enterprise architecture and data management framework will improve efficiency, transparency, accountability as key pillars of education reform. As part of this transformation, the Empowering Jamaica's Future SDG Joint Program, or Digital Transformation of Education, which is funded by the SDG Fund and implemented by UN agencies, including UNICEF, UNESCO, WFP, and FAO, will further support the modernization of EMIS. The UN family, which I'm delighted to lead in this country, is committed to ensuring that the digital tools empower educators, enhance student engagement, and strengthen school feeding programs, ultimately fostering a more resilient and inclusive education system. Stakeholder consultations, such as this one, are really essential to ensuring that education transformation is not only effective, but also inclusive and sustainable. The success of EMIS reform depends on the active participation of all of us sitting here and those who are not here. Because really, we need to bring into account diverse perspectives and expertise to the table. Your contributions will shape EMIS that is responsive to real needs, grounded in best practice, and adaptable to the evolving education landscape. In fostering open dialogue and collaboration, this workshop provides a critical space for identifying challenges, refining strategies, and building consensus on the way forward. Key areas such as data governance, interoperability, difficult word, system integration require collective decision-making to ensure that the EMIS functions effectively cut across all levels of the education system. A well-structured and transparent EMIS will not only enhance accountability, but also help bridge education disparities, ensuring that every child, regardless of their background, has access to quality education. Moreover, this consultation sets the stage for long-term sustainability. Digital transformation is just about adopting new technologies. It is about embedding a culture of data-driven decision-making and continuous improvement. By working together, we can create an integrated education system that is adaptable, forward-thinking, centered on improving learning outcomes for every child in Jamaica. As we look forward to the official launch of the Digital Transformation for Education Joint Program later this month, I urge all partners to engage fully in these directions and seize this opportunity to co-create a sustainable and future-ready, EMIS framework. Together, we can harness digital innovation to power education transformation and ultimately achieve Jamaica's Vision 2030 and indeed the Sustainable Development Goals, which are only 5 years away from now. I thank you and look forward to hearing the outcomes of this workshop, because as the Permanent Secretary said, this really is what we need to get forward, because then we'll be able to know what's happening in each individual school, what each teacher is up to, I guess, PS as well, and whether indeed our children are getting the value for money, because it's a really expensive undertaking, not just from the UN side, but also from the government side. And I'm totally delighted since I came to this country that I think education is taken very seriously. I believe your ministry is the biggest, the other ministers keep on telling me education is the biggest budget in Jamaica, which is excellent. It just shows you the commitment that the government has made to placing education and educating each one of those children we see in Jamaica to their fullest potential. So thank you so much, and looking forward to hearing from you and the outcome of this meeting. Neil, please come over. I don't want to take your job, but I'm just mentioning here that I'm delighted there's another African apart from me here. That's Neil. I didn't know that, so pleasure to meet you, Neil. And, yeah, and good luck.
Right. Thank you so much for that, Dennis. Again, I think setting the tone and the direction of what we need to achieve over the next 3 days and beyond very clearly. So last but not least, in terms of the opening remarks from various colleagues, I invite our colleague Olga Isaza, who's the representative for UNICEF in Jamaica. As you've heard already from the Permanent Secretary, UNICEF's played a really critical role in supporting this activity. And so we hand over to you as the... I'll just point out, sorry, I have to read this. UNICEF is also the lead agency for the UN SDG Joint Program on Digital Transformation for Education. And as the Permanent Secretaries pointed out, all of those UN agencies are really operating in a very coordinated fashion. I've had the benefit of working in around 50 or 60 countries around the world, and that level of coordination is quite rare in my experience. So we really are blessed with your leadership. So over to you.
Thank you so much. Good morning, everyone. A friend of mine who is here usually says that one of the most difficult things is to participate in the same panel with Dr. Trapp, because she is a very fluid speaker, so she is very much engaged. So I will do my best, but please forgive me. Dr. Trapp, Permanent Secretary in the Ministry of Education, Skills, Youth, and Information, Mr. Dennis Zulu, the United Nations Resident Coordination in Jamaica, Paul Hector, officers in charge for the director in UNESCO, Dana Sacchetti, country head of WFP, Stacy Rose, national policy specialist and program coordination from FAO, and Mr. Niels Butchell, EMIS consultant from the Minister of Education, other public officials, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, EMIS champions, my colleagues in UNICEF, good morning to everyone. An education management information system is essential for Jamaica as it proves as a structured approach to collecting, managing, analyzing, and using data in the education sector. It is a critical part of overall digital transformation processes. By implementing an EMIS, the Education Ministry will be better able to efficiently track key data points such as student attendance, behaviors and performance, teachers' qualifications, children meals and nutrition status, school resources, and other critical metrics. More than 300 schools are well on their way to maximizing this new system, starting with key data points of attendance and behaviors. Phase 1, training for 263 target schools has been completed, with more than 400 EMIS teachers attending from across all 7 regions. A sustainable platform with self-guided information is in development, even as more and more schools are connected to internet. A behavior change plan is in effect, as we know that adapting a change and doing things in a new way is not easy. This is a key component from EMIS implementation. UNICEF is happy to be leading this effort with our partners UN agencies, UNESCO, the World Food Programme, and the Food and Agriculture Organization. Our aim is to improve data collection, reporting, and utilization, driving transformative changes in education delivery by leveraging digital solutions. Key objectives include using real-time data to enhance teacher management, improve student attendance, expand the coverage and quality of the National School Feeding Program, and elevate learning outcomes. Allow me to make special mention of the addition of a new metric in this effort, which is the student nutrition aspect. This will include moving towards more efficient methods of food supply and tracking the impact of school meals on the nation's students. This metric will significantly impact student learning and well-being, as we know. Data have shown that nutrition is critical to child ability to perform at optimal level at school. In Jamaica, where challenges like poor nutrition affect student concentration, academic performance, and overall health, having nutrition data within EMIS will equip the education system to monitor and respond to this issue. Schools will be able to better monitor the health and dietary needs of students identified at risk population and implement target interventions to ensure that children receive proper nourishment that improve their ability to learn and thrive in the classroom. Furthermore, an EMIS that includes nutrition data can foster collaboration between the education, health, and social protection sector. By linking attendance, behavior, and academic performance with nutrition information, you and others, stakeholders, across the health and social protection sectors will be in a position to better understand the correlations between family dynamics and community dynamics and health and education outcomes. This integration will empower policymakers to work together to develop comprehensive strategies. This holistic approach will contribute to a more robust and sustainable education system. We hope that all of this will occur within the framework of the school nutrition policy, which we believe will be approved in the Cabinet very soon. UNICEF is committed to ensuring that interventions are based on evidence that will lead to better outcomes for students and schools across Jamaica. This workshop is one of the key activities to enable the smooth implementation of the improved data-driven approach. Thank you, UNESCO, for leading it. This 3 days EMIS Stakeholder Consultation Workshop intends to advance the efforts to define a scalable, integrated, and efficient enterprise architecture and data management framework. This framework aims to improve data accuracy and consistency, enhance system interoperability, streamline resource uses, and ensure compliance with legal and ethical standards. Your engagement and full support will help us to help policymakers make informed decisions, allocate resources more effectively, and identify areas that need improvement. Thank you for your participation over the next few days. We truly value your inputs and count on you to ensure that EMIS is implemented across the island and is successful. Thank you so much.
Right, so thank you so much, Olga, and all three of you for those, I think, excellent introductory remarks that have set the tone and direction for not only the next 3 days, but actually for the program of work that will unfold from this. I think we invite you to maybe go and sit down if you don't want to be the center of attention anymore. We hope you'll be able to stay just for the next couple of sessions, and then obviously we'll get into our working groups. I also need to just work out how to connect my laptop here. Right. So that was the fun part all finished. And now comes the bad news, which is that, so I've been working in the EMIS space and the educational technology space for over 30 years. And one of the things that I have learned in that time is that, unfortunately, successful implementation of initiatives like a management information system is really about the detail of implementation. As a general rule, we like to talk a lot about interesting sounding ideas and grand visions and all of that kind of thing. But one of the things I learned early on in my career from the chief information officer of an insurance company who I was interviewing is that a bad idea, well executed, is infinitely better than lots of good ideas. And so the problem is that that requires planning and discussion about the detail, which is what we're going to be focusing on for the next 3 days. So I'll apologize up front for the fact that that is not the world's most entertaining topic of discussion. Data requirements are not something that you typically can't get to sleep. You're so excited that you're going to get to discuss them the next day. But on the other hand, if we don't do this thoroughly and systematically, then the prospect that the EMIS will work successfully is zero. So I'm very grateful for your commitment to participate in this process. I will talk a little bit more about it now. And sort of give you also clarity as to where we're intending to go from here. One of the other things that I've learned in my career is that, unfortunately, ICT, information and communication technology initiatives, are generally not very good at democracy. So you tend to find with ICT that you can have whatever you like as long as it's exactly what the service provider is offering you. So, and this is a really critical point to note, because one of the mistakes that we make when we get to ICT implementation is that we actually think we can have lots of opportunities to influence the direction of the initiative over time. And my experience is that that happens at the expense of a successful initiative. So this particular process of consultation is critical, because this is the point in the process where the democracy exists. This is the point in the process where everybody will have the opportunity to make their inputs into what they want the EMIS to be delivering for them. We will be doing that over the course of the next 3 days in these working sessions. I'll discuss those in more detail. And then we will also be giving you opportunity to review the documentation that will flow from this before it's finalized. As Dr. Troop mentioned, we'll probably also have one final convening to review and finalize all of that. But please be very clear, and this is where the South African in me comes out. This is your opportunity to influence the direction of EMIS. It will not exist 3 months from now. 3 months from now, we will have made the decisions, we will have finalized the data management framework and the enterprise architecture, and we will be in the weeds of implementation with our technical partners. We have one of our technical partners in the room today, which is Community Systems Foundation. Maybe, Carl, you can just indicate yourself there. So Carl is from CSF, which is responsible for the development of the Open EMIS platform, which is one of our subsystems for the EMIS. We've invited him to attend because we think that it's critical that he understands the direction in which we're headed and what you're expecting from the EMIS, because then he can make sure that it happens technically. He may or may, he's a much more polite Australian than I am a South African, so he'll probably keep this to himself. But I suspect that he will tell you, if pushed, that one of the challenges that he experiences is that governments do not actually articulate clearly enough exactly what they want from an EMIS. And then they get something, and then they complain afterwards that what they got is not what they wanted. But I think we can all be clear whose fault that is. In this case, we have the opportunity to do this a very different way around. Sorry, I'm not sure why my presentation has moved off your screen there. So I'm going to just change my settings here. Sorry about this. You can look at the tigers of India if you like. Okay, we're back. So again, I think what we're doing here represents a sea change in terms of EMIS implementation from what I've seen in many other countries, where we actually proceed with technical implementation and then try to reverse engineer the requirements of government afterwards. We're going to get the opportunity in this workshop to do things the other way around. We're very fortunate that we have UNICEF, UNESCO, and the World Food Programme coordinating in this activity so that we'll be investing in an aligned fashion. I do also feel obliged to mention the other key development agency involved in this, which is the World Bank through Jamaica's Education Promise. I feel duty-bound to observe that because the funding for my consultancy obviously is coming from JEP, and I think they can't be with us today, but it has been a great achievement that we've also been able to ensure alignment between the UN agency's work and the work of the World Bank. So that's there. So here is what we're trying to achieve. First of all, sensitizing everybody to the process we're engaged in. We've successfully achieved that already. Number two is to define a high-level enterprise architecture for the Jamaica EMIS and the roles of the different subsystems. I will come back to that when I talk about the current situation. We also want to identify who the business process owners for the different subsystems are going to be to ensure ownership of the developed subsystems. I'm sure many of you know Charlene very well from the ESMS unit. The ESMS unit, though, is not the business owner of any of the subsystems of the EMIS. They are the technical unit responsible for ensuring successful implementation. The business owners are the line units within the ministry, as well as other agencies like Jamaican Teachers Council, for example. Those are the business owners, many of you in the room today. We need to look at the existing subsystems and applications to decide which ones we are retaining, which ones we might be considering decommissioning, and then how we're going to integrate between them. This will be particularly important in the area of teachers and personnel for reasons I'll explain shortly, but it applies in all the other areas of the EMIS as well. We're then going to review a document that I've prepared in advance of this workshop, looking at what I'm calling the business requirements of the EMIS. These are high-level statements about what we want the EMIS to deliver. This is based on global best practices, as well as engagements here in Jamaica. It also benefits from engagements elsewhere in the region. For example, I'm working in Suriname, Barbados, Guyana, as well as across the OECS. And we're pulling all of that together into what we hope will slowly actually become a regional articulation of business requirements. Very importantly, once we've agreed on those business requirements, we are going to be unpacking that in consultation with our technical partners into a very comprehensive data management framework. And UNESCO is supporting this activity. We're very grateful for that. That data management framework is really, I think, it's in a sense the kind of key value proposition of this workshop. And I would say that it's what sets this process apart from any others that I've engaged in so far. And the reason for that is that with the data management framework, we will be going into a level of technical detail of documenting what we want the EMIS to deliver and who is responsible for which components of its management that simply does not exist in most other countries around the world. So this morning, I've been indicating to my colleague Pierre Chapelet from UNESCO, you'll hear from him shortly, that I believe that what we're going to generate out of this engagement will not only give us the marching orders for Jamaica, but actually will be a document that can be reused to support EMIS implementation in many other countries. I'm also planning on sharing versions of that document with the other countries I'm working with in the Caribbean. So no pressure, but what we're doing here in Jamaica is actually going to set the scene for what I believe will become a regional coordinated process of EMIS development and implementation in the region. And this makes sense, firstly, because your data management needs in the different countries are very similar. And secondly, because actually as small countries, it makes sense to try and pool resources and collaborate where you can, rather than every country doing its own thing. That becomes very extreme in the case of the OECS. But even between countries like Jamaica, St. Lucia, and Barbados, I think it's very clear that there's value to be gained from collaboration. And Jamaica is in front of this process, and I think a lot of other countries will benefit from what we do here. So after that, in our final session today, we'll agree on a process for finalizing that data management framework, which we hope will happen over the next 6 to 8 weeks. So we will develop detailed documentation that will be shared with you. And I would like to re-emphasize here, nobody is going to enjoy reading a data management framework document. But you have to read the document and you have to give your approval, because otherwise your needs are not going to be met. So I apologize once up front for sharing boring documentation with you down the line, but please understand that the sharing of that documentation and its finalization is in many senses the critical, most important step, the single most critical step in this process. Because once we've signed that off, we can hand it over to CSF, hand it over to other technical partners who are working on different subsystems, and then tell them to go and actually execute what we are requesting. I hope that makes sense. Finally, over the course of the next 3 days, I will be distilling from this engagement what the policy implications are for all of this. It's all well and good to have this framework, but we need to make sure it's underpinned by an approved national policy that makes it clear who is responsible for what, how governance and financing will work, et cetera, et cetera. And so within the next 6 months, we expect to have an approved EMIS policy which has the data management framework as its underpinning document, and that makes it very clear who is expected to do what. Because again, ICT is not a democracy. If you listen to what the Permanent Secretary said, it's not possible to achieve her goals if schools are deciding whether to opt in or out of sharing information with the EMIS. It will become compulsory for them to share information. Likewise, it will be compulsory for all the business owners to cooperate in the way in which we have agreed during this consultative process. And we need clear accountability mechanisms to ensure that people are held to account for what they are supposed to achieve. Again, I don't apologize for this. That is the only way in which a data management system can work successfully. It does not work successfully if people just wake up in the morning and decide whether or not they're going to collaborate. I hope that makes sense. But I hope the value proposition that the Permanent Secretary provided in terms of the benefits we stand all to gain from this justify that requirement. So as you've heard, obviously, from the various participants, the purpose of an EMIS is to give us a kind of capacity to enhance decision-making and accountability and to improve educational outcomes in Jamaica. We want to make sure that we define that data management framework, that we are focused on improving data accuracy and consistency, making sure that there's system interoperability, streamlining resource use, and ensuring compliance with legal and ethical standards. We also want to establish a sustainable and adaptable foundation that enables the EMIS to meet evolving educational needs and reforms effectively. That said, when I started my work here in September, I did a very brief assessment of the current situation, fortunately backed up by a lot of good documentation that told me what was there. And there's a summary of a few items that we identified through that process that I just wanted to highlight today. The first one is that we have multiple fragmented data systems in operation within the education system in Jamaica currently. And there is a lack of integration between them. There are also duplicated data sets and therefore no single source of truth. To give you an example of what I'm talking about here, but I'm not trying to pick on anybody in saying this, there are currently at least 3 systems that are responsible for data on teachers. The first is Open EMIS itself, where the core module has a lot of information on teachers, and where, as we implement the annual census through Open EMIS over the course of the next coming couple of months, we will have a quite accurate data set of teachers in that system, building on what we have already. But in addition to that, the Jamaican Teachers Council, as I'm sure you all know, has a teacher registration database that also keeps a record of those teachers. In fact, we've collaborated on a manual basis in using the data from the JTC to help to populate Open EMIS ahead of the annual census. So this fragmentation isn't because of a lack of desire to cooperate. It's a technical reality that these 2 systems can't talk to each other. And then thirdly, we have My HR Plus, which is responsible for payroll and has a whole lot of information on teachers as well. Clearly, this is problematic because we are duplicating data about teachers in 3 different subsystems, and there's no integration between them. Please be clear, that doesn't mean we shouldn't have 3 different subsystems. We don't want the payroll system to be integrated with the JTC database. Payroll is a Ministry of Finance function, and it needs to be kept independent because there's also obviously privacy and security concerns there. But what we do need to ensure is that there is one single master record of all teachers that the other subsystems are able to draw on and use for their functions. And we have to decide which of those 3 applications will host the master data set on teachers and personnel, and then how the other subsystems will integrate with it. I hope I'm making sense what I'm saying there in terms of that as a practical example. And it is critical that we get that right. To date, we've been operating a manual census. As you've heard me just mention now, working with Ms. Johnson and the planning unit, we are actually in the final stages of preparing for the rollout of an annual census using the Open EMIS platform. It's turned out to be a more challenging exercise than we had hoped, but on the other hand, it's also going to be very comprehensive in the end, so I think it's going to set us in good stead. Very importantly, though, it requires us to go through this large-scale annual event of collecting data from schools. In the vision that was articulated to you by the Permanent Secretary, my hope is that either by next year or at least by 24 months from now, we should never need to actually run an annual census again, because schools are simply submitting that information in real time as it's being generated in a way that actually doesn't require them to do that once off. So that is a very clear objective that we have for this exercise. I suspect Ms. Johnson and the planning unit will also be grateful because the headaches that we're going through trying to get the annual census up and running are things that you wouldn't wish on your worst enemy, let alone the nice people of the planning unit. So we want to make that process redundant. That also obviously then really empowers the planning unit to focus on what they ought to be doing, which is not collecting information, but analyzing it and using it for planning purposes. We should be able to automate the processes of data collection through the schools so that the center, the ministry, is able to focus on its core functions. And the same would even apply at the regional level, for example, with teacher and student attendance. Regional offices are wasting huge amounts of time collecting data on attendance manually and doing calculations to try and work out what the attendance is. We should never have to do that again. We should be allowing those regional offices to be looking at the information and then taking preemptive actions to try and deal with challenges that are emerging from that data. I hope that makes sense what I'm saying. There is also an absence of EMIS policy alignment, so we don't have an EMIS policy in place here, and we need to make sure that that's put in place, but also very importantly, we need to ensure that that EMIS policy is aligned with all the other policies of government. The education policies, obviously, but also data privacy and security policies, all of the other kinds of policies that govern an EMIS. An EMIS policy is not a standalone document. It needs to be integrated with the overall policy environment. We also have no clear governance structure to provide oversight within the Ministry of Education currently, and we want to make sure that we rectify that through the policy development. Obviously, that governance structure doesn't just represent the ministry, but would also be representing, for example, the JTC. The Ministry of Finance would need to be part of that governance structure. And there's a few external agencies that we might want represented on that governance structure. When I arrived here, I think it's fair to say that we had fairly uncoordinated development contributions. And by that I mean contributions from the development partners. What you hear today is radically different from that. So actually we've already achieved the goal, I think, of ensuring that there's coordinated contribution from development partners to supporting the work of the Ministry of Education. And we thank the development partners and the ministry for that. We also thank the Permanent Secretary for her leadership in ensuring that that happens, because it's one of the biggest problems that undermines Ministry of Education operations is development partners who come in and all are doing their own fragmented initiatives, usually with good intentions, but unfortunately the lack of coordination from the side of the ministry then means that those the sum of those doesn't add up, or the whole of those doesn't add up to more than the sum of the parts, and quite often they actually conflict with each other. So fortunately we don't have that problem anymore. And lastly, we've had challenges with regard to school ICT infrastructure. We obviously need to ensure, if we want the EMIS to be successful, we need to make sure that all schools have the necessary ICT devices to capture information and that they have the connectivity to be able to upload that information into the EMIS over time. Practically speaking, we need to be realistic. In instances where schools are not going to have dedicated connectivity, we might need to make sure that there are offline applications available on mobile devices or something similar to allow schools to capture the data, and it can then be uploaded maybe when that device can be brought in sight of good connectivity. But over time, we would ideally prefer that all schools have good connectivity. That's not only useful for EMIS, it's useful for a number of different purposes. I'm not going to take you into this document in detail because it's very boring, or into this diagram. But this diagram is reflecting what we call a theory of change. It's articulating a series of problems, which are pretty much what I've just mapped out to you now, and then describing a number of activities that we're going to implement over the course of the next 12 to 24 months to solve those problems. So operationalizing an EMIS steering committee, getting the policy in place, getting connectivity to schools and ICT devices, making sure that we're capacitating the ministry. So the idea that the Permanent Secretary mentioned of a data center, that we spec that out, define job descriptions, recruit the appropriate people, shore up the capacity across the ministry where it's needed at both national and regional level, put in place an EMIS help desk, which is already underway, make sure we provide all the professional development and training, and also go through the process of change management, which is going to be one of the most important elements. Charlene and her team are grappling with this on a daily basis as we roll the EMIS modules out slowly to the first, as you heard, 245 schools. It's a big challenge to get schools to buy into and accept the changes that need to happen with this EMIS rollout. We can't just expect it to happen by itself, so change management is a critical aspect of all of that. So that's going to lead us to the sort of key outputs of the sustainable EMIS, the governance structures and the training. And the end goal is to make sure we have a sustainable EMIS ecosystem that ensures accurate, reliable, and timely data collection, analysis, and reporting to support evidence-based decision-making, efficient resource allocation, and improved accountability. This structure is we've already begun defining a detailed monitoring and evaluation framework from that, and then we will be using that to monitor actively over the course of the next 2 years to ensure that we actually achieve these goals. So this is not just something that's put up there to be a nice diagram. It is going to provide us, again, very clear direction against which we can monitor progress. Please.
Yeah, relevant at this point where you take testings or submissions, as you mentioned, data center and build out administrative. I'm just wondering, what would you do then when you have an ETOP that has the infrastructure to support something like that? I don't think it's really serious about establishing an environment that has the
Sure.
support around it that we would consider getting it out on a daily basis.
Yeah. So, I mean, that's one. My interpretation of what the Permanent Secretary is talking about is not about putting the hosting of this platform inside the ministry. So I interpreted that more as actually a human capacity for actually processing and analyzing data rather than a technical system. But my suggestion is that what we do is in the next session, let's talk about that a bit more and check. So we have a number of questions after Pierre's presentation that I'll be posing to the group, and I'll pick that topic up again as something we can discuss. I totally agree with you. At this point, we also actually for the foreseeable future, while we're in development, we'll actually be using CSF's hosting environment for Open EMIS because there's going to be a lot of technical development taking place. But obviously, we do need to think about what the long-term location of the various systems is. I agree that we shouldn't duplicate efforts where it's not needed. So, these are our key priorities. I'm not going to run through them again. These are basically replicating a lot of what I've spoken about. What I will just mention down the bottom left-hand side is that we're going to, from this workshop, complete a 3-year EMIS roadmap and implementation plan. We already have a draft of that. And then across on the right, as I've mentioned, we'll have a strong monitoring and evaluation framework to track and support EMIS implementation. And then the rest of these activities we've discussed already. Very briefly, here is a kind of overview of some of the key subsystems that exist. So I've already spoken about education management systems. We've got Open EMIS, which you've heard about already. There's the National Student Registration System, which manages student registrations. There's the JTC, Teacher Registration and Appraisal Database. And then we have Google Classroom also operating and there's linked digital learning platforms to that. We then have the National ID System, which will provide centralized identity management. Could be very important to integrate that, especially with areas like student registration and teacher registration. We have My HR Plus. We also have a teacher gratuity system. And then under support and logistics, we also have a textbook distribution system in place. So there's a lot of, this is just a there's a few more than these, and I suspect there's more I haven't identified yet. So one of the things that I want to do over the course of the next 3 days is identify all the existing subsystems that we want to pull in here. So this is just a high-level picture to illustrate the point that EMIS is not one single system. But what we may seek to do is not persist with all of these systems over time, because obviously the more subsystems we have, the more expense and complexity we have. So we might want to take some decisions about merging some of these systems and decommissioning others. Again, sorry, the text of this is too small for you to be able to see properly. But what I wanted to highlight with this diagram is to make it clear that EMIS implementation is not a question of developing a database that meets the requirements of all of you. Sustainable EMIS implementation requires many different components for successful implementation. So down the bottom, where in the blue areas, is governance, sustainable financing, ICT infrastructure, legislation, policies, and regulations. As we then move up, we have the organizational structures and HR management processes to support implementation. Linked to that is project management and product and service procurement. For those of you who have the misfortune to have worked in the space of procurement, you'll know that probably procurement is the single biggest factor that actually gets in the way of successful implementation of initiatives. And it's been the bane of my life actually over the last 6 months, I'd have to say. Not so much in Jamaica, in fact, but in other countries where I'm working, where procurement delays are really getting in the way of implementation progress. So we need to think about all of those issues. Then off to the left, we have the importance of capacity building, monitoring and evaluation, and knowledge sharing. And then on the right, stakeholder collaboration, change management, and quality assurance. And then only in the last little purple ones at the top do we talk about the whole process of data acquisitions. Sorry, these are slightly the wrong, but this is about data collection, analysis, and so on. So sorry, that's the wrong diagram reflecting there. But what that illustrates is that EMIS, the actual technical work of EMIS implementation is a very small component of overall sustainability. Our 3-year plan needs to look at sustainability across all of these different blocks. So, we are going to spend the bulk of today, of the next 3 days in working sessions. We will start with institutions, and if you look at the agenda, you will see the timing of this. We will then move on to personnel and personnel management, which obviously focuses primarily on teachers, but also on all the other personnel, school principals, and school administrators, regional officers, etc. And then we will have a third session focused on students and student assessment. We don't expect everybody to participate in all 3 sessions. You will know which session is relevant to the work that you do and which sessions you ought to be in. We also have generated a list of who we feel ought to be in those different sessions, and we hope that you will be in attendance there. These working sessions are really the core of what we're trying to achieve through this activity. So in those working sessions, I'll be distributing documentation. We'll look at the existing subsystems and applications to determine which ones we want to retain and which ones we want to phase out and replace. Then we will discuss the high-level business requirements using the draft documentation as a guide. I'll give you an opportunity to review that and then to add things that are missing, to remove things that you think are not relevant, and so on. And then we need to agree on the roles and responsibilities of the key players and stakeholders. So these are critical decisions that we need to make over the next 3 days. And I believe that with focus and focused discussion, we can make really excellent progress in going through all of that documentation systematically and also hearing from you, of course, what are the critical needs you need met from the EMIS when it's finished and up and running. We are fortunate to have our colleague Lincoln here. Lincoln, if you can just show yourself. Lincoln is our rapporteur, and he will be responsible for documenting all the agreements that we reached during those working sessions. I will then be taking all of that and integrating into a revised version of that business requirements document, which I will circulate to all of you for your review and final feedback. And it is from that that we will generate the data management framework. I hope the process is clear and makes sense to everybody. So at this stage, what we are focusing on is what are the key functions you need the EMIS to fulfill in order to be able to do your job effectively. And obviously, also any other ideas that you have of good functions that the EMIS ought to fulfill. And then we might have some conversations which can be easy or difficult depending on the situation, where we reach agreement on roles and responsibilities. I'll warn us all up front that those conversations can be difficult, and that's why you deploy a South African into the mix to try and help with facilitating that. I was doing this exercise about 1.5 years ago in Papua New Guinea, where in fact there was quite severe contestation between the Teachers' Council and the Ministry, and the chairman of the Teachers' Council and the permanent secretary of the Ministry had not spoken to each other, I think, for 2 years before we put them in a room together. Fortunately, they like playing rugby in Papua New Guinea, so I was able to invoke the metaphor of Springbok rugby, which is the South African rugby team is called the Springboks. And we have a reputation for being quite aggressive and nasty on the field. And so I pointed out that they've seen South Africa play rugby, and that's how I manage workshops, which is I just keep going straight down the field until I get to the finish line. So they all laughed, thought that was very funny. We had some quite severe arguments and the odd walkout here and there, but we actually managed to reach consensus in the process, which I think was the important part. And I won't say that the permanent secretary and the chairman of the Teachers' Council are friends anymore, but we did at least end up with a clear documentation of who was responsible for what and an agreement to actually have one integrated EMIS managing teacher data in the system. Sorry, just on that, on their point, that was a not insubstantial achievement because many teachers actually were not getting paid salaries because they kept being deregistered from the Teachers' Council system at the start of every year. So we managed to change that policy. So I'm just flagging there that the conversations are not always necessarily going to be easy. And they will require us to compromise and to give up on certain things for a greater good. From what I've seen here in Jamaica, I don't foresee anything close to the same kind of problems as we experienced there. But I think, again, if we just work together and keep discussing until we reach agreement, I think we can get there. And that will also be the critical focus of these conversations. And please remember, if you're not in the conversation, then you're not going to be influencing the outcomes of the conversation. So that's why it's in your interests to stay on for those sessions that are relevant to you. So that's an overview of where we're at, where we're trying to head. I hope you get a sense that this is a very comprehensive process. This is not a once-off workshop. We didn't bring you here to listen to speeches, even though you've had to endure a few speeches up to now. We have one more presentation from Pierre to give us guidance on global best practices. And from there on, we're moving into discussion. And that's the way it's going to be for the next 2.5 days. So this really is your workshop. I'm very grateful to have the opportunity to support this process. I'm sure you are all looking forward to the tea break, which is now 5 minutes late. And I've learned as a workshop facilitator over many years that you can get away with murder as long as you finish on time for tea, lunch, and at the end of the day. And so I don't want to risk my reputation any further. So please, there will be opportunity for questions after Pierre's presentation. I actually have structured questions for you to answer, so please don't think that I'm trying to shut down the space for asking questions. But I think you all need a tea break by now. And so when we come back in after Pierre's presented, we'll have lots of opportunity for discussion, and that will continue over the next 2.5 days. So thank you very much, all of you, for your attention and for being here and supporting this process. And I'm looking forward to the proceedings as they move forward. Thank you very much. And let's enjoy the tea that's outside. Oh, no, Charlene's coming up. Let's not enjoy the tea just yet.
No, I'm just going to. Okay. So I'm
Okay, Rebecca, I'm sure it's very important, but it'll have to wait. Okay, I hope everyone had a good tea break. So we have, as I'd indicated, we've asked our colleague Pierre Chapelet, who is from UNESCO headquarters in Paris, will introduce himself shortly. Pierre and I have known each other for quite a while. We started work together on EMIS implementation in Guyana some years ago, and we've stayed in contact since. And he is a wealth of knowledge on EMIS implementation around the world. We're privileged to have him here over the course of the full 3 days to help us just to make sure that we've identified all the critical things that need to be in the EMIS by the time we're finished, and also to give us some guidance on how best to proceed. So we've invited Pierre just to make a short presentation on, as you see, the need to strengthen EMIS for effective decision-making. He'll draw on some of that global best practice. And then from there, we'll start going into plenary discussion to start discussing some of the critical issues we need to be thinking about over the course of the next 3 days. Thanks very much, Pierre.
Thank you so much, Neil, and I'm very pleased to be with you today. I first would like to apologize in advance for my strong French accent. I hope you will still understand what I'm saying. So I will try to speak slowly so that you get it. So I'm very pleased to be here. Actually, I mean, I came here some time ago. It was in 2019, when I was here with EADB, working on somehow assessing the current situation of EMIS. And so I'm very pleased to see that 4 or 5 years after, I mean, the ministry, took somehow, some of those recommendations and is now moving forward into the implementation of this big plan for EMIS strengthening. So very pleased to see those things unfolding. Well, so my presentation might somehow duplicate what has been said already, but still I think that there's some important insight that we should keep in mind as we discuss in those coming 3 days. Before starting going deep into the topic, just I would like to start by again recalling what just take some time to look at what is an EMIS and try to unpack what is behind the EMIS theory of change. And again, it looks very simple. EMIS is not that simple, and there are many somehow shortcuts behind or thinking when we think about EMIS implementation. So basically, when ministries they think about EMIS, they want a better EMIS. They think that for that you will get better data. Those data will give you better ways to implement your policies. At the end, you expect to get better results, and this is to get more efficiency, more quality, more quantity, more of whatever you think. Oh, I'm sorry. Oh, okay. Oh, okay. Is it okay like that? All right. Thank you. And I will slow down. Thank you. I would like to say that again, to recall that data is really, at the center of global and national agendas. At the national level, as we all know, data is really key to somehow support, decision-making in education, making sure that somehow the data is supporting evidence-based management and strategic planning decisions. And here, I would like to highlight that I speak about two things. One is management, and one is strategic planning. Those are two different things. Yet, we expect EMIS to contribute to both those different two domains. We also think that EMIS is, data is key, of course, to ground decisions around effective resource allocation, and we expect data somehow to help, for continuous system improvement and somehow to bring accountability in management of education, with the ultimate goal that this will translate into better learning and better learning outcomes. Data is also emerging as a UN key priority, and as you know, there are large programs at UN level around strengthening data systems across SDG domains, and so as it was presented to you this morning, we have indeed the UN SDG joint funding program that is actually supporting this data efforts in Jamaica. Now let's get step back and try to unpack what is an EMIS. And as it was already said, but I think it's really important that we keep insisting on that. EMIS is just not only about IT, it's about many other things that we need to consider. So this definition I'm presenting is from UNESCO, and you will see there are different parts. So first of all, we start by saying that EMIS is a coordinated network of individuals, organizations, institutions, technologies, processes, procedures, rules, regulations, and all this somehow should be moved together to produce the fit-for-purpose quality data to inform decision-making to operate the education system. This looks simple, yet you see that there are many pieces that need to be brought together. Also, as I said before, we should keep in mind that EMIS is here to serve the needs of the planners as well as the managers. And it needs to fit the needs of people at the central ministry level, as well as, the needs of the data consumers at the subnational level, in the regional administration, down to the schools, and even, also provide services to families and to the learners. If you look at EMIS, we could actually say that there is a need for what we call vertical integration. Vertical integration is somehow making sure that all the data set that you will bring together will be able to serve different level of decision. So you have, of course, the decisions linked to the national and global reporting requirements. You need to take decisions linked to planning and strategy at the macro level, national level. Then you need to have data to also inform the management and control of operations. Then you go down to the operational level with activities closer to schools, and you end up with the learning processes in schools. For all those different levels, data is needed, and the more you go down, the more granular and detailed information you will need to make an informed decision. At the school level, you need to know the names of your learners. You need to know the marks of your learners. But of course, this information is useless if you are at the strategic level. But still, you will need information that is built of this detailed information that is collected or somehow compiled at the school level. So you see that there is really this need for integrating different data sets at different levels and making sure that all this information somehow links together into a meaningful way. Another way to look at integration is also to think of EMIS not as only a Ministry of Education system, but as a system that is also what I would say horizontally integrated. So here, when I say horizontally, it means that when we build an EMIS, we should try to really look at building a sector-wide architecture. Sector-wide meaning that you want your data systems to really somehow cover all the different levels of education and making sure that all the stakeholders and administrations involved in those levels of education are somehow bringing their data together into a common architecture. So this is the sector-wide architecture. So there is the Ministry of Education with all those, level of decision that happens, and you will find the same for the specialized agencies, like the teacher, in the case of Jamaica, this is the Jamaican Teacher Council, and there are also other line ministries or administrations that you would like to link with your EMIS, like the Ministry of Health and Wellness, Ministry of Labor and Social Security. All those stakeholders somehow may have information linked to your learners, linked to your teachers, and somehow you want to make sure that you will link your data systems with those agencies as well. And of course, we should keep in mind that whatever system is developed, this system somehow is part of a broader government level ecosystem, and you want to make sure that those systems you will be developing will be fully integrated and aligned with the directions taken by the government as a whole. Another key element of EMIS, and this has been said already in the previous presentations, is the fact that you need to build up interoperable data sets. Basically, each data set may have different functionalities, but yet they will somehow all feed into a single data architecture. And so those data sets are there, and then you need to take care of them. You need to ensure for each data set, you need to decide how this data will be collected, how it will be processed, managed, stored, archived, used, and analyzed. And for that, you need to think about your data consumers. What is the target audience for your data? Why do you need this data? For what decision? So you will have to somehow properly map out what are your data requirements for the different stakeholders. And then from there, you will have to decide on what are the different data sources and what are the different data sets that need to be brought together in order to produce the information that you need to make your decision. If you look again at what are those data sets, I mean, this is very simple. We speak about the basic, data sets that you need. So this is about, you look about a student or learner data set. There will be a school data set. There will be data sets linked to the human resources management. There will be data sets linked to infrastructures, to resources and to financial resources and so on and so forth. I want to say that some data sets, most of the data sets will be quantitative, but you may have also some data that is coming from qualitative analysis, yet this data may have some meaning to inform decision, and so you would like this information to be somehow embedded in a way or another into your EMIS architecture. Now, if we look at integrations and data sets, and Neil already highlighted that in his presentation, I want to show you this diagram, and this is actually a diagram that we produced in 2019 when we did this diagnosis. And you can see on the left all the different applications, software applications that were used at that time by the Ministry of Education. And you can see the different processes those applications or softwares are addressing. So processes linked to the management of physical infrastructures, linked to the teachers, linked to HR, to learners, to the digital content, and so on and so forth. And you can see that there are a lot of duplications. Or, for example, if you look at HR, the red column, you can see that there are around 7 systems somehow that touch upon this teacher information. So which, of course, question us, and we should think of how we should integrate those things to avoid, duplications and duplication in data entry, notably. In terms of governance, it's also really key that when you establish an EMIS, you need to have a very strong governance. Somehow. Architecture in place to ensure that you will somehow succeed in your implementation. One risk we often see in many countries is that everybody wants to have the Rolls-Royce. Everybody wants to have the crazy, fancy system that will track every learner, which will, generate, insights as a press of a button, and that's really great. But of course, you need to make sure that whatever system you develop, your system somehow align with your capacities. You need to make sure that you have proper capacities inside the ministry to run such complex systems. And you need to make sure that you have the budgets necessary to sustain those systems. We have seen so many implementations where somehow EMIS strengthening plans were supported by partners without somehow strong investment from the government. And by the time somehow those projects end, there is high risk that the system collapse because this was not somehow budgeted properly and there is no means to sustain the implementation of those systems. It's also key that through this governance mechanism, you ensure that every stakeholder is sharing the same vision of what is this EMIS we are looking at. And such meeting is actually an occasion to align visions together and making sure that we have a comprehensive and common understanding of the EMIS we want to build. Looking at how EMIS have been transforming worldwide, you have this graph here on the left, which shows you how those data systems in education have been evolving over time. Historically, EMIS was equal to a school census. The school census is very powerful. This is a tool really that is here to support strategic planning decisions. It has a lot of meaning because it provides you with a snapshot of the situation at a specific point in time on a regular basis. So this census is key somehow to build those data sets about, the statistical data sets about how your system is performing. And it's actually, I would say that even if you go for an enterprise system, it's likely that within this big EMIS architecture, you may still keep a census subsystem as one component of this broader EMIS architecture. The census, is based on aggregated data, and so it provides snapshots, chronological series, but it's not good at providing you with, of course, daily evidence. If you want to know, attendance as of today, you will not get that from the census. As somehow IT systems improved and expanded within public administrations, more and more ministries have been digitalizing business processes. And so we saw the emergence of different systems competing with this census. And so we start oftentimes with HR management information systems, then there is the finance management information system that is coming from the Ministry of Finance. And so you have a collection of systems that are progressively built up. Most of the new ones are really more real-time, here somehow to support very specific business processes linked to HR management, financial management, and so on and so forth. And so those systems are, the big advantage of those is that they are providing very granular and detailed information, and they are providing this real-time information. So as UNESCO, we think that it's really by bringing those two pieces together that you are able somehow to bring a comprehensive EMIS architecture. So bringing together census operations with somehow transactional systems that are really, real-time, addressing the needs of your business processes. If we want to summarize, when we think about what is a modern EMIS, there are some, I would say, commonalities when you look at, country implementations. First of all, this diagram, I think, is important to keep in mind. When you look at, the EMIS from the perspective of those layers, you see that basically it's likely to, if you want to have a digitalized EMIS, you will have to first rely on the physical infrastructure. Then you may, on top of this physical infrastructure, there might be some digital public infrastructures at the government level that are there somehow to support the development of data systems within a specific sector like education. And then within your sector, education, you may actually digitalize some of your processes that are used within the administration. And at the end, on top of that, you will have the learner's journey. You would like those data systems to feed into the learner's journey. And as the PS said at the beginning as an introduction of this workshop, our target is the learner, it's not the data system. So let's not forget that as we unfold discussions during those 3 days. Key elements of a modern EMIS. First, it should support both administrative management, monitoring, and strategic planning. And again, I really insist on that because the needs are different. As a manager, you want a real-time system informing you on your daily decisions, like should I recruit, how many teachers do I need to recruit, by when, where they should be deployed. That's an example. Or how much, what is the budget I should allocate for this and that based on some other evidence about the needs. And then you have the strategic planning requirements. As a strategic planner, you want to somehow set the directions, look at how your system is evolving, what is the trajectory, what are the future needs, and you need to plan ahead of time. And so for that, you will have also a need for some information. Yet this information here doesn't need to be really real-time. What you need is a comprehensive data sets across time. Another element, as I said, is that to make sure that whatever you build, it should be aligned with your level of capacities. And you need to make sure that you will leverage, to the extent possible, a local ecosystem of solutions, expertise, so that you will be able to maintain and sustain solutions on your own, after somehow whatever solution is implemented. As I said also before, you need to make sure that whatever you build, you should keep in mind that you want to establish a sector-wide architecture able to really provide you with this overall understanding of how the education sector is working. And so you need to bring together different levels of education, different thematic areas, all into the same data architecture. And so if you want to integrate data from different pieces together, obviously you will have to look at data standards or data management frameworks as well somehow to document who is producing what for what purpose. Another important element is to recall that whatever you develop, it will not stay in silo. It will have to be connected and integrated with broader data systems that are at the government level. And so if there is an information already existing somewhere, you should not somehow replicate and recollect, but rather connect to that information so that you avoid duplication and you keep data integrity across systems. Also, and that's, I think, a key one, you need to make sure that your EMIS architecture is modular, flexible, and scalable. Today, you may need information ABC. Fine. But tomorrow, you will need information CDE. Your needs will keep evolving. So as your needs evolve, you need to make sure that your data solutions will evolve and somehow follow those needs. And that's something that is oftentimes underestimated. You will oftentimes find, implementations where you develop a system, it's monolithic, and it cannot really be, it cannot evolve over time. And so it will work maybe for a few years, and when the data needs, evolve, the system will not work anymore. So right from the beginning, make sure that your system is flexible and scalable to somehow address the future needs for information. Another element also to bring in here is the fact that for long, actually, EMIS were always somehow input-driven. You would somehow collect information only about inputs into the education sector. How many teachers, how many schools, how many infrastructures, how many textbooks, and whatever. Of course, this is key. But what we should care about is the learner journey. So we should really make sure that the EMIS also embeds measurement of learning outcomes so that you can actually compare the resource you put in the system with somehow the result in terms of learning outcomes. And what we see is most of the time, this outcome part of the things is not embedded into the EMIS. And last and not least, you want to make sure that your system is actionable and that it will be able to provide, the timely information at all levels, making sure that you build up what we call feedback loops. It means here that data entry is boring. And when you ask school to enter to somehow provide data to you, you should somehow find ways to acknowledge for the effort that is spent on somehow giving you data. And so it's important that you try to establish those feedback loops so that the data producers are seeing somehow the added value of giving you quality information. So if you can somehow give them back something that is meaningful for them to make decisions, and that they see somehow that this information they gave you is actually useful for you, but also for them to decide, then next time they will actually improve their data collection. And so really this feedback loop is, I think, is really key in the success of any EMIS implementation. Bottom line, technology is important, but yet it's not the only element. There are many other factors that you need to consider when you deploy an EMIS, and let's keep that in mind as we go through our journey into our EMIS transformation journey. So there are the EMIS governance aspects. There are aspects linked to institutional and organizational arrangements, documentations, capacities of your human resources, documentation of workflows, data standards, data integrations, and so on and so forth. There are so many things to consider. And so let's look at what are the different domains. So this is a 360 kind of perspective of what are the elements that you should take into consideration. And so you could basically group them in 4 main dimensions: governance, EMIS governance, then management, EMIS management, technical architecture, data and information products. And you see that there are many sub-elements. In the governance, of course, you need to make sure that you have the proper political, legal, and strategic frameworks. You need to make sure that there are also proper financial resources, that also you are somehow the roles and responsibilities are properly defined on the management side, making sure that you have enough human resources and skilled resources to drive your system, making sure that somehow you have the right infrastructures to IT infrastructures somehow to run your IT systems if you want to go for an IT-based EMIS. And then, of course, there are all the processes linked to the data quality and the production of meaningful statistical products. And so there are many things to consider here. And oftentimes what we see, when somehow we map the progress of countries in those different areas, you will find oftentimes that it's very uneven. And some countries may actually put all efforts into technical architecture, but forgetting somehow to make the proper steps in the area of management or governance. And if you forget one of those domains, you are likely to fail at some stage. So let's keep this diagram in mind, and let's try to think of having an implementation that is evenly taking into consideration, evenly considering somehow all those domains and making sure that they are all aligned at the same level so that implementation goes smoothly. I will stop here, maybe, and that's it. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Pierre. Before I let Pierre go, I thought now that we've got time for discussion and so on, if anyone had any questions that they'd like to ask him about what he's presented, please, Dana.
Thank you, Pierre. You spoke a little bit about the role of the data producers and the importance that we need to attach to that role, right? Without it, none of this really moves forward. Can you speak about some of those incentives or best practices that you've seen in terms of EMIS implementation and having schools generate and produce the data? What's worked well? What are some novel approaches that have been taken? And I know that we may not have any of those producers in the room today. I think that's a critical constituency that we do need to consider throughout the conceptualization, development, and implementation of the EMIS in Jamaica and in any environment.
No, thank you for that question. Indeed, data producers are key, and there is no, secret. There is no secret solution from what we see in most of the country implementation. What works is when you make the data producer understand that they are not producing for nothing. They are producing for something meaningful for the administration, but also for them. So if you really want that people to produce good data, it's because they will find a meaning for collecting this information. And so obviously, for the meaning to be there, it needs to be linked somehow to the tasks that people are performing. So as a school principal or teacher, you should ask people to somehow to provide information that relates to their work. If you ask them to provide, meaningless information about things they don't even understand and they are not linked to, they are unlikely to provide you with reliable information. So try somehow always to make sure that you find the right data producer. Sometimes you will tend somehow to always go to the school to ask for data because this is somehow the last level. Yet some of this information that you may collect from schools is probably already available somewhere else. So if that's the case, let's tap on that. Let's not ask the school to give you again an information that you have. And if they start to see that, somehow that you are also taking care of them, and that somehow you are not just asking them just for the sake of asking, but you're actually just asking what is the minimum things that they should give, you will actually empower them. They will see the benefits, they will see the value, and they will actually provide you with more quality information.
Thank you for that, and thank you for the question as well, Dana. This also just provides a quick moment for me to make my shameless plug, which everyone will summarily ignore over the course of the next 2.5 days, no doubt. And that is that I think during the design phase of an EMIS implementation, one of the biggest risks is that we start treating this exercise like a shopping list of all the data requirements that we can think of that we'd like to have in the history of the world. And we should remember that the bigger we make the data requirement design, the more work we are creating for those data producers that Pierre is talking about and Dana is asking about. And in many instances where I've engaged with that design, it actually becomes clear that people are not even sure what they're doing with that data once they've collected it. In other words, there is no obvious decision-making, planning, or reporting event that is linked to the data that's being collected. We're just collecting it because we can. And with no disrespect intended to centralized bureaucracies, like a National Ministry of Education, for example, one of the big problems we have in ministries of education is that because people work in silos, they don't actually often get to see the composite implications of all of the policy choices they make on those data producers. They only think about what they are asking those producers to do. Let's say teachers or school administrators, for example. But when you start then adding up what they're being asked to do by all of the other departments within the ministry, you actually end up with a situation where their administrative load is so heavy that there's very little time left for them to do any actual work. And I do think that this is a crisis facing the teaching profession, that one of the things that makes teaching such an unpleasant profession nowadays is actually the scale of administration that's expected from the center. So I think that Dana's question is not just, it's not just how do we get the data producers to share the data, it's actually also how do we make sure that the design of the system makes it easier for them to do their jobs. Because at the end of the day, implementation of ICT is supposed to be something that adds productivity and makes people's workload less. Unfortunately, many management information systems add to workload and reduce productivity for the reasons I've just described. So you ignore me at your peril because this will be a question I'll be posing as we go through. But I think if we can try to make sure that we don't fall into the trap over the coming few days of just saying we want this and this and this and this and this and this and keep adding more and more things to the list of things that we want, I think that will be tremendously helpful. It also then falls to us and to our technical partners, like CSF, for example, to also make sure that the way in which we're designing the systems actually is user-friendly and facilitates data capture in the fastest way possible with the least effort. Just to give one practical example of something that we'll be piloting here is starting to look, for example, at the use of, say, a swipe card system or something equivalent to capture teacher and student attendance data without actually requiring someone to collect that information manually. So if we can come up with a technological way of being able to automate the process of collecting certain kinds of information, that radically reduces the workload. So I think I'm just adding to these things some specifics about the Jamaican context that I think can really help us to get to this point. And I hope that's all consistent with what Pierre was saying. So thank you very much for the question, Dana. Any other questions to Pierre before we start moving on? Yes, please. It's good timing to ask a question just as you take a mouthful.
I don't know if this is for Pierre per se, but I'm just listening and wondering considerations for legal or the legislative framework for some of these things. I'm thinking of the Data Protection Act. Even the point you made a while ago, people swiping in, just to make sure that the broader picture is there to support any of the technologies that we bring on board to help to drive this.
Definitely. And thank you. Please also, at this point, we're not just taking questions, but comments and issues that people would like to raise also would be very helpful. I think this is important on a number of levels. So there's, I think, the more obvious ones around data privacy and security that we need to be contemplating. There's also sometimes less obvious ones. So as part of the policy development process, we actually also need to review the existing legislation. One of the challenges I came across in the country where I was working is that there was tremendous resistance from teachers to collecting attendance data digitally. And the reason for that was actually that legislation indicated that they were required to keep hard copy records of teacher attendance and student attendance at the school. And so obviously hard copy implies a printed document that someone's writing in. So in fact, the legislation actually contradicted the idea of digital copies of attendance records. So we do need to make sure as we proceed that legislative and policy review takes place in parallel with this exercise to ensure that there are not contradictions. Just while I'm on that point, I'll add that there's even a further complexity to that, I think, beyond this, which is that obviously the implementation of an EMIS provides a moment for us to be able to revise certain processes. A very good example of this is around student applications and registrations at the commencement of the academic year, where once we're doing that process electronically as opposed to manually, there's a lot of ways in which we can actually streamline the process of student registration and applications. So we have this moment where we might even want to consider revising certain policies because of the opportunities afforded by digitizing the EMIS. So this is also another thing that we should be contemplating over the course of the next 2 to 3 years. So sorry, I'm just building on what you're saying to add the multiple layers at which we need to contemplate your point. And just make that clear. So sorry, over to you next.
Hello.
Yeah, no, just on that, sorry, if you allow me. In 2019, when we did this mapping, so there were already like 4 documents existing. So there was this ICT policy at government level. This was from 2011. I'm not sure if this is updated now. There was the ICT in education policy. This one from the Ministry of Education, 2018. Then there was, at that time, a draft Access to Information Act. So maybe now this is in the act passed. And there was this Data Protection Act as well that was in the making but not yet available. So I'm not sure if those documents are now produced. But obviously you need to ensure that all those documents align together. And oftentimes there is a risk that they are misaligned with all sorts of issues around that. Thank you. Oh, sorry, I couldn't hear.
I was just checking if you have done any research recently, or because I know in 2018 you had us at incipient.
Yes.
So where are we now?
Okay, thank you for that question. So I don't know, we should probably do another diagnosis after some time to see, how things have evolved. Yes, but we can come to that later. But the diagram I've shown you actually is based on a self-assessment tool that UNESCO has developed last year and is available for any country to use. Maybe you want to rely on that. It's a tool that can allow you to quickly somehow find out where you stand in terms of progress on all those dimensions and to eventually figure out what is missing and what is required for you to improve. So maybe you could look at that. We can discuss that later.
But just to answer your question directly in terms of that specific diagnostic assessment instrument that Pierre referred to, we will repeat that, but I'd like to make some concrete progress before we repeat it, so I think we'll probably be repeating that exercise in about 12 months from now. Okay. Next is over here. I then have a hand here, and I'll keep taking them as I see them.
Okay, so 2 points for me. On the discussion of the sync between the regulatory frameworks, the policy, and these things becoming law, so that the management and implementation and infrastructure can be sustainable. As we speak about digital transformation, perhaps, I'm not an expert on the policy process and the constitutional process, but I would be curious to know what are some of the things that we're doing where digital transformation is concerned in the policy process? Because we have a lot of digital transformation when it comes to public internal processes and external in terms of the clients that the public sector deals with. But on the matter of the policies, if there is no digitization of that process, then whatever work is being done in terms of business delivery is really in vain. So that's one question that I would like to put to those who are working in the regulatory environment here. The second thing is, as it concerns a question for Pierre, as it concerns the IIEP, I know that the Institute for Education Planning at UNESCO works very closely with the education policy planners across the ministries. Is there any kind of synchrony between His portfolio, I'm not sure which office he's working with. Is it the headquarters? I'm not sure. And the IIP.
That one. Thank you for that question. So indeed, IIP is one of our specialized institutes, and so from HQ we are working closely with our institutes. We have an IIP for capacity development, targeting mainly the planners in the ministries, but we have also other institutes like the Institutes of Statistics, to which you are reporting your national statistics. No, we are working very closely in this area, and IIP is offering a set of trainings specifically on EMIS. And they are in the course of redesigning those training programs. So I invite you to go to this IIP Global Campus, which provides free and non-free training programs linked to data in education, planning, and EMIS.
Thank you, Pierre. And so maybe just before I come to you, I'm going to just open up quickly to see if anyone has some comments to make on the sort of implications for broader digital transformation policy. I know that there are some bigger processes happening within the ministry to try to coordinate digital transformation. I've participated in one or two meetings about that. I do think that you're flagging a critical point. The plus side is that it's certainly in my terms of reference to look at the policy environment in terms of development of a policy for EMIS, so that will certainly take place, as well as to conduct a review of the legislation and other policies and provide advice on other modifications that need to be made. At this stage, that doesn't extend to contemplating the bigger universe of digital transformation, but I think it's inevitably will be the case that we need to be thinking about it in those more holistic terms. So I don't know if there's any initiatives that anybody would want to be mentioning at this stage. Otherwise, we'll make sure to align with them. So again, that's why we have our rapporteur here as well, so that all of these things do get recorded and we make sure that we incorporate them into the process. So the one thing that I forgot to do now at this point is, obviously colleagues will recognize that I omitted the process of having all the workshop attendees introduce themselves. That was partly in my quest to avoid being late for tea, but also partly because I thought it might get really death-defyingly boring to listen to everybody introduce themselves in such a big group. But if people who are making comments and asking questions could maybe just also introduce themselves and indicate where they're from so that we can start to get to know each other. It'll be useful for me as well. So.
Thank you. Morning. Deidre Coy from the Planning Institute of Jamaica. Not sure who to direct this question to, but maybe Neil can respond. Just so I'm clear, will private education institutions be a part of this, of EMIS? How will they contribute to the data collection? What will their role be, if any?
You want to provide a reply there, Charlene?
Okay. Thank you for that question. Yes, the EMIS looks to capture record data for all students, for all children in Jamaica. So definitely they will be a part of the data capture process. We already have a process where our census, and so all institutions, public, private, are being introduced to the EMIS platform and that process of starting to use the EMIS to collect data. Okay, thank you.
Oh, good morning, everybody. One of the challenges that I've faced as one of the persons my name, Andrew Rose. Right, I'm one of the facilitators for the EMIS training program. So I've been virtually at all the regions across Jamaica as one of the persons who are training. And one of the challenges that we have had, which Neil has mentioned before, is resistance to some of this. Not just resistance, but again, they cite the legislation, right? Because they don't see it as being important. So whenever we ask them the stuff, and maybe this is just a plea to see how quickly we can speed this up, because principals will say to me, why should I ask my teachers to be marking 2 and in some cases 3 registers? In this case, where they already have a system in place, say RenWeb or something, and now you have to be marking the EMIS, and in addition to that, you still have the physical register. They think it's additional work. That's one. And then for things like incidents report, which you use the behavior to fill out, they say, we still have to produce a physical document, and yet still we still have that. So sometimes I struggle to find a way to convince them to say, yes, you need to do this. So I am facing this kind of pushback from them, and it makes my job as one of the persons who are on the ground trying to get them to buy into this, because I understand the benefits of the EMIS and what it can do for education and the transformation that it can bring in terms of the what we call the real-time data and the availability of real-time and the decision-making that can come from that. But if the persons who are supposed to be providing the data are resisting providing the data, then everything that we are doing is going to be a waste of time at this stage. So whatever we can do to make that process, whether we're going to mandate it from ministry at this point and say, yes, you need to do it, or whatever it is that we're going to do, but it makes the job easier on the ground. So when we start the rollout for the additional schools that we're going to go to, then having had data from these 245 schools, it makes it much easier for us to be able to continue what we're doing on the ground.
Thank you so much for that. I think in many ways, you have the hardest job of everyone at this stage because we're at the very beginning of the journey. And so I think it's where the change management is hardest. We also haven't yet fully defined what we want the scope of the EMIS to be. We're still continuing with parallel processes, for example, rolling out the annual census in the next month or so. And so I think at this stage, that sales pitch is kind of hardest. I expect it to get significantly easier as we proceed, because I think as we conclude this process of developing the data management framework, we can articulate a much stronger value proposition. We can make it clear to people that this will reduce the number of data collection events. And we can say with confidence, for example, as we proceed, that they won't then need to do the annual census data collection. I mean, even in this round, it's going to be easier for them because they're going to be doing the annual census using pre-existing data, so not having to start from scratch, et cetera, et cetera. So we do need to keep working actively on this as part of a change management strategy. But I do hope that through our coordinated effort here, it's going to all start getting easier and easier as we proceed. I hope that makes sense, what I'm saying. But recognizing that it's a challenge. Yes.
Andrew Lee, e-learning. What I would suggest is that for those schools that have their EMIS, for lack of a better expression, RenWeb or whatever it is, that they would become part of this whole process so that some representation, is part of this ecosystem, so that even some of the functionalities that they have that might not be readily available or recognized within what we're doing, that those can be considered so that they would have better and easier buy-in when it comes to implementation.
Thank you. I think that's a good idea. I think even now we're seeing some benefit coming from, at least in principle, the possibility for schools that are actually paying for third-party systems, potentially once we have all the modules of Open EMIS up and functioning for them, they can then contemplate no longer having to actually pay the cost of a third-party system, and they can do all the things that they're currently doing through those third-party systems using this application. Obviously, that's not something we'll enforce, but I do think it's part of the value proposition. So hopefully there's a lot of different ways in which we can start to streamline and simplify the lives of the school principals and the administrators as we proceed.
Right, but I strongly believe that having representation from that body
absolutely
should be considered.
Sure. We did invite some representation, but it's limited at this stage. But it is very important moving forward. I totally agree.
Thank you. Thank you for bringing that. If I may, on that one, what we see also sometimes is, you have two options as a ministry. One option is somehow to impose, to force, all schools, including private, somehow to rely on the systems you will provide them with. This is very hard to do. moreover in the private sector. And so oftentimes what ministries will do is they will simply somehow keep updated and they will share publicly data standards around, how data can flow into the ministry systems. And so they will make those standards available publicly so that, IT companies developing, products for schools will somehow ensure that those standards, are replicated into their systems, and so that their systems can actually push data into the ministry's information system.
And so, sorry, just as also one minor practical, it's not minor, but I think a specific practical point to note from what you've said, and I think we can record this as well, is to make sure that there is, once we have a fuller draft flowing from this process, that we actually go into those consultative exercises at the next level, making sure that we're consulting the sort of next level of stakeholders as we finalize this. I think that's a critical part of change management and aligns well with what you're saying. So we see this happening in phases. I hope that makes sense.
Yes, and just to add to the conversation regarding the third party, RenWeb, we actually did start a conversation with them already, because integration is a big part of ourselves. We're not encouraging schools to discard what they have, but we must get the data. So integration is important, and we know that the EMIS will sell itself over time and that transition, because we're aware that the schools may be in contract that they have time-bound commitments to. So we're flexible, and we are open to the discussions to ensure that the data is what we are requiring initially here, and we'll get to that point. But we also want to add to the conversation here too, is that we try to select as much stakeholders as possible to get this to this point, yes, and also the importance of having everyone buy in, because we do need the internal buy-in. We need all the agencies, the buy-in and the commitment, because one of the fear of the school is that we're going to crash and burn at some point in time. So they don't want to give up what they have. So they too are actually waiting to see us, being there. And then, yes, so that's why that change management, we brought it in as part of when we go to the teachers, go to the persons who are going to use, facilitators, we do provide that change management aspect, because it's critical that we get the buy-in and the encouragement as early as possible.
Okay, so we're now going to sort of carry on with some conversation, and we have plenty of time for that conversation. But one of the things that I've discovered from running engagements of this kind is that if you ask people often enough if there's a problem, then eventually they say yes. So what I am going to do for the remainder of this workshop engagement actually is I'm going to be posing questions and inviting discussion. So it's now really very much all over to you as the participants. The inputs coming from the so-called experts are over, and it's really now to hear from you as to what the EMIS ought to look like, et cetera, et cetera. So it's the length, the duration of the workshop sessions is going to depend on how much conversation they generate, if that makes sense what I'm saying. So if the conversation is over and we've covered all the issues that we need to cover, I'm not going to keep trying to stimulate conversation just for the sake of keeping you all trapped in the room for extra time. We can have a longer lunch or tea break or whatever we like. But on the other hand, if there are issues that we need to be getting out, then we should be getting them out. So I've put down a first set of questions, which are actually contained in the workshop agenda. So you could take a quick look at those if you've got the workshop agenda with you, and you can see what issues we're going to discuss over the next hour or so. And those of you who know me already, or even those of you who don't but are coming to get to know me slightly through this facilitation exercise, will know that my character or my personality is one that is cursed with a tendency to provide an answer to a question, even if the best thing that I could do is keep quiet. So you should understand that if I don't get answers to questions, then I will make up my own answers. And then, good luck to all of you having to deal with the consequences of what I make up. But we are definitely moving forward with this process. So I hope that's clear what I'm saying. So if I ask you, for example, the first question, which is what is an appropriate governance structure for EMIS implementation, I already have an opinion about that based on work that I've done in other countries, but my opinion might be completely inappropriate for Jamaica. So I hope I'm clear what I'm saying there. Yeah. But please understand, that's how consultants work. If I'm told to design a governance structure, then if I don't get your guidance, I make up my own governance structure and off we go. And that way, at least I get paid, which is the important thing in my life. Okay. So there's a few questions here, and I think they're interrelated. So please feel free to put whatever issues you want. But number one, and absolutely critical in my view, is we have to have a strong governance structure to underpin the EMIS implementation. To Charlene's earlier point, if we want schools to feel confidence that this is not a fly-by-night operation that the ministry is introducing and will be gone in the next 6 months, they need to know that there is a regular structure that is meeting and that is taking this seriously and that is ensuring longevity. Linked to that, my second question then is what policies might need review or strengthening as part of this process of EMIS implementation? You'll see that there's a few more questions there. I'll come back to those now, but I think governance and policies are interrelated to a certain extent. So I invite initial thoughts from people. What kind of governance structure do you think we ought to be putting in place to support the EMIS implementation and to ensure both that it's taken seriously and that there's accountability, that people are held to account for what they do, and that we ensure its sustainability in the long run? Any thoughts on that? And please be clear, this is a brainstorming session. There are no wrong answers. And if you give your thoughts, there will be plenty of opportunities as we proceed with the policy development process to refine. So this is really just to create a framework for initial discussion. How should we govern EMIS implementation? Yes, please. And you need to introduce yourself again.
Yes, sorry about that. So my name is Zara Henry. I am also a consultant. The name of my consulting business is ELH Careers. I'm a career coach and management consultant. I do employee coaching with small and medium businesses. My background is in development. I used to work at the Ministry of Culture in the entertainment division, and I also used to work at UNESCO, so I see some of my colleagues here in the culture division, but my research focus is really on education and education reform. I was just at St. Andrew High School just now. So that's my background. My question is really a bit of an icebreaker question, actually. So I used to teach languages before I started career coaching. So I love accents, and I recognize yours. I feel like you're from South Africa. Is that true? Where are you from in South Africa? Could you tell us? That's all for now.
I thought you were going to guess based on my...
Oh, no, I'm not so good. I just have friends from different places in South Africa. So you live in Johannesburg. Thank you. That's it. So back to you.
Well, there we go. We haven't got insight into governance structures for EMIS through that, but yes, please.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Gillette Hope Webb. All right, so I'm trying. I think you need to have the appropriate system in place so all schools or the ministry agencies would have to be properly equipped to manage the system that will be put in place. Persons would have to be trained, sensitization trained, because if you do not have persons who are trained, they will not be knowledgeable as to how to implement successfully. And also, the relevant committee in place to ensure that it is sustainable.
Thank you for those general overviews. And then when we come to the last one, you talk about an appropriate committee. So what does that look like in practice from your perspective?
All right, so you'd have different committees in place that can manage the different stages, step by step. All right, so you'd have the implementation committee, for example. You would have the monitoring committee, and so forth.
So then, rather than me pouncing on you again, yes, please. And then I'll come to you as well, Vivian.
Hi, good morning. This is Marcia Phillips, Director of Projects in the Ministry of Education, Skills, Youth, and Information. In terms of the governance structure, and this is something that I have been thinking about myself, we certainly would need a structure that includes persons from the schools, the regions. The ministry does have a QEC structure that I believe that if we draw people from the QECs, it would cover the structure from the schools level. We would need, as Mrs. Hopewell says, I think at least 3 critical committees. One would be what we call a steering committee that would have general oversight, and then there would be need for a technical committee that would provide technical oversight and support as well. And then there is, of course, the monitoring and evaluation committee. So that would be my recommendation.
Thank you so much, Marcia. So over here next.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Vivian Johnson. Marcia has said some of the things that I want to say, but I'm thinking that you do have a national body, like the ministry, so that's centralized, and then you have the regions, because we're trying to see, right now there's a consultancy, what it is that the region, how to get them more autonomous in the sense that you want them to be totally responsible for their region so they can give a proper update on whatever is happening within their region. So they, for example, so they are responsible for the type of information, but you do have the central that would drive the information needed. And then from the school level, so the region have that direct link with the schools, and you will have the different access point depending on whomever is given the responsibility for pulling off the information. So I think you do have the overall from the national, then you have the region build out, and then from the school level and the feeder way up.
Thank you so much for that. Just before I come on to the next hands, I just wanted to flag something I think which is really important, implicit in what you said, not necessarily explicit. And that is about rethinking the role of regional officers in the context of EMIS deployment. And again, I'm not an expert on Jamaican education system, but I know education systems globally quite well. The reality is that for a very long time, district and regional officers have quite often just been an elaborate kind of post office type system that has supported manual flow of information up and down the chain. Once we're moving into a context of digitized information, of course, that requirement is going to fall away. And we should be very ambitious about seeing it fall away rather than clinging on to it because, for example, people might be scared of losing jobs or whatever the case might be. So this is a good moment to be reinventing that function of the regional offices in the way you just described, to imagine a future where there are a whole lot of things that regional offices have been doing to date, and I'm thinking here just of the one thing I know about, which is the collation of data on attendance, which is a significant part of the workload as I understand it, but hopefully would become redundant. And then to say, well, what would they be able to do with their time if they aren't having to do that kind of clerical manual work? So I think that is an important consideration. The other thing that I'd like to just put in the mix based on a few of the comments now is to ask, and I think this links to what Marcia was saying just now, is When we talk about a governance structure for EMIS, are we talking about a new structure that is EMIS specific, or are there existing governance structures into which we can integrate the function of EMIS oversight? The reason I ask that question is I think we all know that one of the big things plaguing ministries and government bureaucracies in general is the proliferation of meetings for different purposes. And so the more committees and the more structures we create, of course, the more we worsen that problem. So to the extent that we can look at using existing structures to then ensure the governance oversight of EMIS, of course, the more effective potentially. So I'm just throwing that out there as a thought for you, and comments on that would be welcome. I've got 2 hands at this table, which I'll take next, and then I'll come to you and here. Please go ahead. You have to switch the mic on.
So good morning, everyone. My name is Averine Coley-Allison. I'm from eLearning Jamaica, Service Assurance Manager. And I'm sure we can implement all the initiatives if we do not have issue resolution management. Because one of the things is that we can put all the individuals in place, but when an issue is at a school, and the responsiveness is not as quickly as it should be, it compromises the real intent of what EMIS is all about. And so in any governance structure, there has to be something in it that speaks to how do we resolve the issues on a regional or the individual school. And so inclusion in any governance structure would be issue resolution management.
Good morning. I am Marjorie Parcels-Berse. I am an EMIS facilitator. All right, so adding to the roles, the different groups that was mentioned, I think we need a data governance section as well, because we need a group that basically goes through and ensure that all the policies, whether regionally, globally, locally, we are within that scope. Going to what was spoken up there, currently we have a system. We have the island-wide system, but we have persons at the regions that have done training, going through the system, well-versed. We have a group that we basically, those who have gone out and done training, and the schools, so persons are responsible for different schools. As was stated, the problem we're having is the double work. Teachers are not with it because of the double work. So the policy has to be changed, it has to be amended to make our job easy. It is a sell for the primary schools. They are with it, they are ready because most of them have no management system. But we have to mark physical registers plus online. If we do the incident report, we still have to do the behavior report. So the policy could change, make some amendments currently, because not everybody is going to be rolled out at once. So we need to consider those schools that we are pushing for implementation in. How are we going to accommodate those schools for them to actually use the EMIS system, because these are the schools that are going to tell the other schools, come, EMIS is a go, it's where we need to be.
Thank you very much. Lots of important points there.
Good morning. My name is Yashika Blackwood-Grant. I'm from Region 2 within the Ministry of Education, Skills, Youth and Information. You asked about the governance structure that is required to facilitate the implementation of EMIS, and I took it immediately from a regional perspective, and I wondered if you were reading my thoughts, because I was just saying to myself, I hope this is not going to add a new level of work. I think the governance structure already exists pretty much in how the system is structured. I think what we need to look at are what are the unique things about EMIS that may be missing the people that we need to be as responsive, as my colleague said just now, at the regional level especially, where we serve the schools directly. So I would think that because EMIS is primarily about managing people data, and with the passing of the Data Protection Act in Jamaica, we need to ensure that the data protection officers for the regions are in place so that they can help to manage the treatment of teacher data, people data, pardon me, at the school level, because their regional offices are where all the schools come first. Additionally, in terms of the tech support, so we're doing training and we're rolling out in tiers, school to school, so on. But if the regions are not able, are not tooled to respond to the schools, we're also going to create a bottleneck when everybody has to come to central. So those two things, I think, need to be placed in regional offices, a data protection officer, as well as someone with the requisite skills to respond to the technical support. And then the existing governance structure will be able to manage, because schools already know when you have a problem, any problem at all, you reach out to your region. So it's about retooling the region so that they can respond.
Thank you. I think that's very consistent with what I was saying also on the back of Ms. Johnson's comments earlier, that I think that this provides this moment to rethink what the HR structure and functions of the regional offices ought to be. I think the important point that you're making there is that this is not something that can happen in isolation, just looking at EMIS alone. Someone spoke earlier about digital transformation initiatives more generally, so we need to incorporate that. And so there's a number of different elements that link onto that. So I'm going to quickly, you've got to follow up directly to that, right? So very quickly, and then I'm coming over here next.
Yeah, I would suggest that we kind of rethink to be consistent, support what you're saying, what we do at the regional level. And I believe if we put in place structure, centralized structure, service assurance, some form of call center, contact center, where issues at the school level can be fed into that center and be resolved, as opposed to flowing through the regional apparatus. I think the regional system has worked well and done its job, but I think if we're really transforming and becoming more efficient, I think that we ought to rethink the whole regional apparatus.
So, again, this obviously moves several levels above my pay grade at this point. But I think that there are two critical points that you're making that I think that we need to take forward. The first one that I'd mention is obviously that I think, and it comes back to this issue of digital transformation, that I think we can't look at EMIS implementation in isolation from other digital innovations being rolled out. We need to think about them in an integrated fashion. So, and then secondly, working out what the fit for purpose split is between what happens centrally and what happens regionally has to be part of the architecture of that design, and making sure that we're thinking about the way things ought to work in the future, not the way they've worked in the past.
And last point, two pieces. One is really cultural, we're going to have to deal with that. And I think, and it's the change, and dealing with change. And then the next one is, tied up in there is the communication. So we're going to have a big part.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. So sorry, I've got so many hands coming forward, which is exactly what I want. Yes. So I've got this hand. I'm going to take hands in the order in which I've seen them. If it's 1, 2, 3, 4. So that's what I've got so far, and then I'll take more. Please go ahead.
Hello, yeah. Thanks, Neil. Just quickly, I just want to say any contemplation of a governance framework, whether it be committees or otherwise, please ensure that it is in the job descriptions, operational plans, and individual plans of the persons, because this is one of the lessons learned I have heard in government, that oftentimes people are asked to participate in digitalization projects, and it's not in their job description, it's not in any plan, unit, operational, or individual plan, and they have other things to do. So please ensure that it's embedded there. All right, thanks.
So I'm going to add to what you said there. which is also that we shouldn't be adding to people's job descriptions without taking something away. So we need to make sure that there's a displacement effect happening.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Suresh Pedapurdi, IT Manager from National Education.
Sorry, if we can stay
Inspectorate.
focused. Thank you.
I see this EMIS as a centralized data solution, and a lot of other agencies can benefit from this data. So especially the demographic of school and performance. So I just want to know, is there any customized format we can download the data for our agency purpose? Will that EMIS have a facility to download, export the data in a customized format?
So this is something I think we'll have to discuss in more detail in the working sessions. The short answer to your question is yes, but in other words, there should be the capability to be able to download and manipulate data, to whom that access is granted, and at what level of disaggregation of data would be a matter of data privacy and security issues, as well as the functions of the person accessing the information. In other words, in their job description, for what purpose do they require that access? So we would obviously want to ensure that once this design is completed, that we have dashboard facilities that are open to the public to be able to come and review certain data sets and to run reports and so on. Then at the next levels of going down, for example, regional offices ought to be able to access certain kinds of information about their regions, but that might not be disaggregated data because we might need to protect data privacy concerns of certain individuals. School principals might be able to access all the information about their own schools, of course, and then might be able to compare aggregate data of performance of their school with other schools in their region or in the country for benchmarking purposes, but probably wouldn't be able to access disaggregated data. These are all design decisions that need to be taken. So the examples I'm giving you are just illustrative. So the answer is yes, but there's actually a lot of hard work that needs to be done to work out what that design looks like in practice, and we will start that over the course of the next 2.5 days.
Thank you.
Okay, I have listened to some of the comments made, and I was just thinking about the duplication process. And once the data is inputted on the system, the schools should be able to download, save it somewhere. Is there a backup system in place? We have to take into consideration cyber attack. We have to think about systems crashing, laptops, computers, whatever. So what system will be in place to ensure protection of data?
Thank you so much. I'm not going to try and answer that question now. I think you're flagging a critical question that needs to be taken into account in the design of the system. We need to make sure that we have proper data security has two dimensions. One is protecting the information that people are uploading from the wrong people accessing it. And the second one is actually protecting the data from physical disaster, et cetera, et cetera. I think with cloud-based hosting architectures, there's lots of ways in which we can ensure backup and so on. So one of the things that I do point out to, certainly to ministries and to higher education institutions, for example, that I talk about, in all likelihood, their own home-based servers, for example, at a school, are probably the least secure place in which they can store information, both in terms of illegal access to that information and in terms of physical security, because you just need a fire to run through that building and then that data is gone. So I think there's lots of ways in which we can architect backup and security. We need to consider what that should be. So I'm not going to suggest what that should be for now, but we do need to make sure that the policy speaks to that and that the monitoring and evaluation framework ensures that it's implemented. Because that's the last point I'll make about this, is that quite often people have what they think are solid backup solutions in place for data, but because they're not testing them regularly, they're not actually sure if they work or not. And then unfortunately, when crisis does hit, they often discover that actually they're not working as well as they thought they might be. So there's a lot of things we need to think about there. Please.
Thank you very much. My name is Winsome Gordon. I am a little bit, I've listened to everyone, and of course, a robust EMIS is an asset to the education sector. I can accept that. However, I have some concerns, and one is that is the psychosocial dimension of governance, because it could be used to enable and it could be used to rigidify. And where do we put that balance? How do we manage that? Because as small as Jamaica is, it is a big country in terms of its mountains. And its differences are amazing. And the education system could be so rigid, where it has information and it keeps determining that everybody should do this, rather than looking at the differences that EMIS could facilitate, and that education could be relevant in the different areas. Somebody spoke of the quality education circles. Montego Bay is different from St. Thomas. The people behave differently, they respond differently to the education that we provide. So as we talk about the governance, and somebody mentioned that we do have structures, we don't have to set up a new structure. We have structures in the Ministry of Education. It's a matter of reorienting those structures to govern EMIS. How are we going to, or what should we do to ensure that we keep in mind education is a human activity? We are dealing with human beings, they're different, and they respond differently in different situations, whatever. We keep that in mind. At the same time, we have quality EMIS, quality information, that we can use to respond to the differences demanded by a vibrant education sector.
So, I mean, this is a question that exists at so many different levels in terms of finding a suitable response to that, that it's, you're flagging such an important issue. Obviously, I can take the easy way out, which is always, to say that, it's a bit like when people talk about gun control and you say that, well, guns don't kill people, people kill people. I think there's a truth in what you're saying that is also, that in many respects, it's actually about the education policies we have in the system that determine whether or not an EMIS and the data that's being collected is being used to enable the kind of diversity and thriving of the human interactions that you're describing, or whether it's being used to rigidify and control the system. I think that's a bit of too much of an easy answer, and it's definitely my experience that the implementation of ICT systems does have an effect of tending to rigidify and homogenize things rather than creating and enabling the kind of diversity and differences of views, or differences of approaches that I think is embedded in what you're saying. And so I think we need a sort of eternal vigilance about all the decisions we're making through this process to ensure that we don't drift further down that path. I'll go further and say that I actually think that education systems are in a state of crisis globally because they have swung so far away from the humanity of the education process and so far into the rigidity of controlled curriculum and centrally determined standards that define how everybody has to function, that we actually now need to be radically transforming that and coming back to what I would call the rehumanization of education systems. And EMIS can support that. But I do think that there's a much broader swathe of issues that needs to be considered as part of that process. And at the center of that, I would put, which then comes into our conversation about personnel, is that I think that at the center of that is the dehumanization of teachers. And I think teacher policies globally have actually been removing agency from teachers so systematically and I think horrifyingly that we have a kind of duty of care to try and reverse that trend. I'm not saying what I think the situation is here in Jamaica. I'm just talking about what I see globally. So I think EMIS provides us, which is the positive, the implementation of an EMIS provides us the opportunity to reflect on how we want the system to function. We can either use it to entrench the status quo or to entrench further rigidity, or we can use it as a moment to try and create that kind of human engagement and collecting of information that supports what I hear as the vision of what you have in mind. I very much hope that we'll go down the latter pathway, but I don't think that we should take it for granted, because I think left to itself, the implementation of this initiative is most likely to create more rigidity, not to remove it. And so we should be very clear about that risk. So thank you. Also, you've started answering one of my other questions, which is about risk mitigation. So I hope I've made it clear where I stand on that, but this is a collective responsibility of ours as we proceed. I've got another hand here, and then so many other hands I'm losing track, but I'll take them as I go. Go ahead.
All right, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Cardell Wickham from the Organizational Development and Change Management branch within the Ministry of Education. So as it relates to the governance structure, I know that some of our colleagues would have mentioned a committee. One of the challenges we have within the ministry is that we have meetings, but one of the focus of the EMIS is to really have real-time decision-making happening. So one of the suggestions as it relates to the governance structure that I would make or suggest is to have a central team within the ministry that focuses on, overseeing the data collection, data preparing, and the analysis of the information that goes into the EMIS. And they would partner with the regional offices to ensure that information that's going in is accurate and it's coming in at the timeline that we're expecting it to be coming in, and the reports are coming in. So I know that we have a structure now within the regions that supports that. So I'm piggybacking off what some of our colleagues would have mentioned. We do have a structure, but the bigger picture is to really build out what we have currently to make it more fit for purpose and to achieve what we're really looking for. Now, at the regional level, what we would pretty much need is to have our officers liaise with the schools to ensure the information is coming in on a daily basis, or what period we agree to have them coming in at, maybe weekly or monthly, and they hold them accountable. Now, from the central location, which is the central ministry, our role is pretty much going to be to ensure that is happening. The data is going in, and it's pretty much prepared for analysis and real-time processing. But that would be what I would share. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I think those are all excellent points, and I think they align with what other people have said. The one thing that I just want to sort of insert into the discussion about governance is that especially at the national level, we do need to consider the involvement of agencies and ministries beyond the Ministry of Education. So the one obvious example is the Ministry of Finance, which plays a key role in terms of payroll. Obviously, there's the Jamaican Teachers Council, but we might think that forms part of the broader universe of the ministry. There's also the national ID system, so we need to contemplate how we engage with and interact with that, et cetera, et cetera. So I'm just flagging here that we also do need to ensure that whatever governance structure we have also ensures accountability from those agents who are outside of the Ministry of Education's remit, and ensures that they are held to account for delivering what they need to deliver. So I'm just flagging those as additional points. I mean, maybe the other one to be thinking about is the whole role of CXC and how that's going to work out. But that's been an intractable problem for so long that I'm not sure how we deal with it. But over to you.
Okay, on that note about CXC, so on the matter of the students, there are a few things I wanted to note. I will just probably focus on, well, let me preface with the first one and then I'll focus on number 2 and 3. So number 1, I didn't catch the first part because I wasn't here at the beginning, so apologies. I was just a little bit curious about the taxonomy, just the classification of institutions, personnel, students, and the rationale for that. Who is really meant exactly by that? I mean, obviously, personnel is staff, and students, institutions are the organizations, but it's just the organizations in general that we've been speaking about. In other words, why was that the taxonomy that was developed? So that's something I'm not so clear on. Number 2, we've alluded to, when it comes to the demographics in terms of the schools, the education institutions delivering education, we've alluded to primary schools, we've alluded to secondary schools, haven't really heard much about the tertiary. And okay, Understood. Thank you. And then the third one, the third one is, what about the students? I've been hearing a lot about the teachers. I've been hearing a lot about the ministry. What about them? What is really the implication for them in this whole EMIS, system? So would love to just table that for the general discussion that comes subsequently. So, right, so, yeah, so in other words, I mean, I've been listening, and there's been a lot of implications for the other parties. I'm not hearing clearly what the implications are for the students in this whole framework, right? Because if we're looking at the objectives of this, right, we're speaking about students as one of the 3 key data entities. So, I mean, do we just draw a blank when it comes to the students? Like, what is their, why are they, if they are a key entity, one of the 3 key entities in this, then why is it that they were a key entity? Obviously it's because they're the people who are receiving the education, but what is their role in this? I don't know. It's for the experts and the practitioners to say.
So, I mean, thank you for that. I think that's not a question that we can answer in its entirety now, but I think when we go into that section looking at students and student assessment, we can contemplate that. I mean, in my head, the main role of students is to learn, and then as they're learning and they're doing their assessments, the schools will be collecting the relevant information that we consider to be important to be centrally stored and bringing it together, and the system ought to be supporting the learning journey of the students, ideally. That doesn't mean that there's a role for the students in having to do something specific, which would be quite rare, but rather that the system, for example, and this is an illustrative example rather than something that's important, like that it's the only one, is once we're collecting certain data metrics across the system, for example, student attendance, certain student assessment data, behavior, reports of behavior occurrences where whatever the case might be, for example, students not attending school or behavioral issues arising in the school, we can then use those data metrics to construct some kind of early alert system that, based on history of data, gives us an indication when students are at risk of dropping out of the system. So that, for example, then we're now rethinking the role of regional officers because they don't have to be doing all this data collection work. We can now start to be thinking about how we can put in place pastoral care systems that actually intervene early where it looks like students are at risk of dropping out, and going and engaging to try and understand what the reason for certain issues is, and deploying different kinds of support to try to keep those students in the system rather than seeing them drop out. So for me, it's less about roles than implications. And the focus, I mean, back to the point that was made now about humanizing systems, we can either be using these systems and the policies can be designed around them for punitive purposes, to be trying to control and punish people, whatever the case might be, or alternatively, we can be trying to put in place nurturing and caring systems that try to identify risks and help to support people before they then get a certain way down the line and find themselves in much more serious problem. It's for, as I understand it, I'm not an expert, it's way harder to bring a student who has dropped out of the system back into the system than it is to intervene early to prevent a child from dropping out of the system. So early intervention can play a significant role in improving learning performance of students who are at risk for a number of different reasons. These are ultimately human policy choices that we have to make, which it's not for the EMIS to make, if you understand what I'm saying.
I am coming from the perspective of testing. Okay, so I am coming from the test. All right, so maybe maybe I can stand or I don't know.
The whole system's gone down.
Okay, so
Speak loudly in the
yeah, I'll
meantime.
just speak loudly. All right, so I'm thinking about this from the perspective of the students. Just for clarity in terms of my positionality, I don't know if Patrice, I said earlier that my research, and the one that the presenter is using was some research in 2020, which was actually Jamaica was undergoing its education transformation, they had an education transformation commission. I was doing a lot of research.
Two. Okay, two.
I confidently say that the school system in South Africa is basically just structured child abuse because of the way it functions. I'm not sure that that's helpful in an EMIS discussion, but I do think we need to be thinking about why we do things that we do. So I'm grateful for you raising those issues. Are we on track now with
Okay, so we can.
You'll have to speak loudly, I'm afraid.
I will try. So a couple persons mentioned existing structures. So I do not have a full and comprehensive knowledge of the sector. So if one of the persons could just elaborate on what existing structure they were thinking of or referring to, because then I'd be able to consider it more and determine if I disagree or agree with it. And I say that because I do agree with you that any governance structure would need to include entities outside of the ministry. An EGOV, for example. Yes, I'm from PIOJ, so naturally I'm going to say the PIOJ. So it was on that basis that I would like to hear more about the existing structures that were referred to by a few of the colleagues.
So,
I know we don't have time, but yeah.
I mean, for me, the takeaway message from that conversation has been that I need to go away and look at all the existing structures and try and see which ones might be fit for purpose for certain elements of the kind of governance that we've spoken about. So Marsha spoke about 3 levels of governance. We've heard from the various regional inputs what kinds of things need to happen. Now we need to see where existing governance structures might support some of those functions, and then where we might modify, and even maybe modestly create one new structure that allows, say, a quarterly engagement between all the stakeholders or something like that. I think that that's something that's going to require further research for us to come to some answers.
So then would the governance structure be purely operational, or are we talking decision-making level to some extent? I think that also would determine how your governance structure is going to be set up.
So I think there's going to be a strategic dimension.
Exactly.
And there will be operational levels below that.
Okay.
If that makes sense.
All
I
right.
think it's both, is the answer to your question.
Okay, so then the existing structures, I don't know if they're mostly operational, are they? I don't know, but no?
There must be strategic structures in place as well.
I don't know. Okay.
That's why we have to investigate. Thank you, but you're, I mean, it's an important point. And I need to understand them as well, because I don't know, I'm in your boat. I don't know the answer to that.
Good, is it morning or afternoon? Good afternoon, colleagues. It's not working?
It's for the streaming, but you still have to shout very loudly.
Oh, so I still have to shout. I will try. Good afternoon, colleagues. My name is Diane Campbell. I am with the Ministry of Education in Corporate Services. The question posed is with regards to the appropriate governance structure for EMIS implementation, and I want to propose 2. One, in the first instance, where we are just now implementing, we're at the implementation stage, or we're at the project development stage as it relates to EMIS. What I have found is that it is always very useful to have a project team in place, headed by the most senior person within the ministry to ensure compliance. Your governance structure is looking at decision-making, implementation, and accountability. And if you're going to go there, you must lead from the top. And as such, I would suggest that your project management team, which should be led by the permanent secretary, be in place. Having read the Mona School of Business report, which gives an analysis of where we are in the ministry, I recognize that there was a structure in place, but somehow that structure doesn't seem to be functional it is critical that a project management team is in place at this stage to ensure proper implementation and accountability. Once you begin rolling out the system, and the project management team is not only going to have your permanent secretary, but representatives from the regions, representatives from planning, representatives from ICT, representatives from eGov, etc. Because that is where you're going to be looking at the strategic overview of the system. So if you look, for example, at how we implemented EMIS, the My HR Plus system in the ministry, the committee, which was led by the permanent secretary, always had the minister at the meetings, for example, but we also had representatives from the regions, the regional directors. We had representatives from IT, from the TIU, which is the Transformation Implementation Unit, which is responsible for My HR Plus from the Ministry of Finance. That way, we could iron out the issues and come to salient conclusions as to the way forward. Once you have your project team managing the rollout of this process, you then move to ensure you recognize what are the teams you need to concretize or to establish within the ministry in the form of a structure. Currently, we have a structure in the planning unit that looks at your census, that looks at your statistics. How do we put all those teams together to look at data analytics? How do we ensure data analytics is scaled up? Because it is one thing to be capturing data. You also want to analyze the data for effective use. So your data analytics team is going to be very important. Do we build out the statistics unit in doing so? Do we anchor the system itself within ICT in the ministry, or do we anchor it in eGov? These are the questions that should be posed to your steering committee or your management team that leads in identifying an established governance structure. But where there is none now, the idea is to create a project team. Well, those are my thoughts.
Thank you. Thank you so much for those. That's excellent thoughts. So I hope Lincoln was writing fast while you were writing, and then we can work out how to operationalize something along those lines. Obviously, I think one of the critical things that hopefully is becoming clear through this conversation, I mean, I was reflecting on this very much as you were talking, but I think through other inputs as well, is the reality that one of the challenges of what we're talking about here is we're talking about an intervention that actually cuts across all of the different functions and levels of the Ministry of Education, rather than just being one. So, I mean, if you think of this from the sort of more traditional company perspective, this is one of the reasons why, thank you. That's much better. I have to lose my voice before I go back to South Africa, which is good news. It's one of the reasons why a lot of companies actually introduce the concept of a chief information officer who is actually basically at a senior level, immediately below the CEO, for example. And I think that one of the ministries of education have actually been remiss in not ensuring that there is a very senior level person whose remit is to drive digital transformation more generally. So I think that just in thinking about how to operationalize the project management team you're describing, obviously understanding the role of the permanent secretary as you've described it, I think there is a problem that we don't actually have that dedicated function within ministries of education in general. And maybe this is also an opportunity to contemplate the construction of something that drives that process. Because otherwise, to add a significant new responsibility on the shoulders of the PS to drive everything is going to be quite complicated. But I think everything you've described makes perfect sense in terms of a way forward. Pierre.
Yeah, if I may. No, just to say that I think it's important also for us to keep in mind that EMIS is not a project, and EMIS is going to last. It's a data system that will be established forever. It will evolve over time, but it's really a core a core element of your administration. So since it's not a project, you need to make sure that you have a proper governance structure for that to maintain over time. And this is really hard because, I mean, as you know, you establish it, you will start receiving, so many requests from so many stakeholders about, I want this, I want that, I want to improve this, I want to build that subsystem, that function, whatever. So you need really, a committee to be in charge of somehow looking at those requirements, prioritizing, the list of things you want to do, making sure that you have the financial capacity to do what you people, are asking you to do. So you need to be really, really careful about that. No, that's all. Sorry. Thank you.
So the word that was used here that you didn't hear necessarily, Pierre, but I think it's consistent with what you're saying, is we need to make sure that this governance structure and the operational systems that sit beneath it institutionalize the implementation of EMIS. I would probably go one level higher even and talk about institutionalizing digital transformation more generally, with EMIS being a subset of that. And so I think we need to contemplate how we want to see that happen over the course of the next 3 to 5 years. Again, though, the only other caveat that I would add to all of this, which is where I start getting panicky, is that we also need to be clear that the more complicated we make this, the more functions we try and make it fulfill, the less likely it is to succeed. So I think the other key to success of institutionalizing this is to have quite simple, straightforward objectives for the first 3 years of execution, so that we are not burdening the implementation down with so much complexity that it actually, almost by definition, will fail. So this is, I think, for me, it might almost be a good moment to be thinking about breaking for lunch anyway, because we're a couple of minutes before lunch. But as we go into these structured discussions, looking at the information around institutions, which is primarily the schools at this stage, I think just to answer an earlier question, this particular engagement is not actually looking at tertiary education institutions because the data requirements around them are very different from schools. It does incorporate to an extent, obviously, colleges, TVET colleges, because they're more similar, so we'd have to contemplate that. And then we'll be looking, obviously, at the personnel, which is teachers, school administrators, principals, regional officers, and ministry officials, and the data flow around that entity, and then, obviously, the students. The key, I think, is to keep this as simple as we can. Already, I think the business requirements document that I'm going to share with you is way too complicated. I think I'd be encouraging you to think of, can we actually remove some elements from it and just focus on some core functions to start? In the absence of that, one of the things that I will definitely be doing in partnership with our UN agency colleagues and with our technical partners is looking at how to phase the implementation, so that instead of trying to do everything at once, we start with first rounds of activity, get the basics operating properly, and then only introduce more sophisticated functionality once that is working successfully and it's been institutionalized in the way we're describing. I think we need to be practical and realistic. The Jamaican education system is a system that has, as all systems do, capacity limitations, and trying to overstretch those capacity limitations for people who are already very busy is counterproductive. So I think we need to make sure that we do few things and do them well, rather than doing lots of things and watching the whole thing fail. So with that in mind, I'd like to thank you all at this stage just for beginning a very fruitful engagement and discussion. As I've indicated, this is a brainstorming process, so we're just trying to generate ideas at this stage. All of this is, I'm kind of processing it to think about how to incorporate things. I'll then start generating documentation, which we can then present and discuss over the course of the next few months. But I think there's a lot of really rich food for thought in all the inputs that I've heard from people today and the discussion that's taken place. We are going to break for lunch shortly, and I'm going to hand over to Charlene just to handle the logistics associated with that. So over to you, Charlene.
Okay, thank you. So, One Logistics, we do have our QR code for registration, and we note that some persons have not registered as yet. We're asking you please to do so as quickly as possible so that we can get that out of the way. All right, so we're going to break for lunch now. The QR code is mounted on the television on the outside. I will also try to project it while we're at lunch. Yes, yes. So I'll try to project it while we're at lunch so persons can also utilize it there. We will be having lunch served at our table, so you don't have to move. Okay? All right, so we're going to do our prayer, and then there might be a little minute or two where you'll be able to stretch your legs, but lunch is served here at the table. So just make space for the servers to carry out that activity. I'm asking Dr. Benjamin to pray for us.
Let us pray. Father, we thank you for the meal that you have prepared for us. We pray you bless those who prepared it, that you'll bless it to our bodies and us in our continued service to you. In Christ's name we pray. Amen.
Thank you very much for that. We will go by the time. I think we're still on track in regards to the agenda timing. So we'll resume on that on the timing that's in our agenda. Thank you.